He was some 45 when he fell in love and married. Like many dissipated men, he had a mean idea of female virtue and especially disbelieved that any portion of it was to be found in London. So he married a country girl without fortune, but with beauty and attractions sufficient to justify his choice. I never saw his lady, but several of her early friends have described her to me. She was something like Gerard, yet how unlike. In the color of the eyes and hair and the formation of the features they resembled, but the expression was wholly different. Her clear complexion was tinged by a pure blood that ebbed and flowed rapidly in her veins, driven by the pulsations of her soul rather than of her body. Her large dark eyes were irresistibly brilliant, and opened their lids on the spectator with an effect such as the sun has when it drops majestically below a heavy cloud and dazzles the beholder with its unexpected beams. She was vivacious, nay, wild of spirit, but though raised far above the dull monotony of common life by her exuberant joyousness of soul, yet every thought and act was ruled by a pure, unsullied heart. Her impulses were keen and imperative. Her sensibility, true to the touch of nature, was tremblingly alive, but their more dangerous tendencies were guarded by excellent principles and a truth never shadowed by a cloud. Her generous and confiding heart might be duped, might spring forward too eagerly, and she might be imprudent, but she was never false. An ingenuous confession of error, if ever she fell into it, purged away all suspicion that anything mysterious or forbidden lurked in her most thoughtless acts. Other women who, like her, are keenly sensitive, and who are driven by ungovernable spirits to do what they afterward repent, and are endowed, as she was, with an aptitude to shame when rebuked, guard their dignity or their fears by falsehood, and while their conduct is essentially innocent, enmesh themselves in such a web of deceit, as not only renders them absolutely criminal in the eyes of those who detect them, but in the end hardens and perverts their better nature. Alida Neville never sheltered herself from the consequences of her faults, rather she met them too eagerly, acknowledged a venial error with too much contrition, and never rested till she had laid her heart bare to her friend and judge, and vindicated its every impulse. To this admirable frankness, soft tenderness, and heart-cheering gaiety was added a great store of common sense. Her fault, if fault it could be called, was a too earnest craving for the sympathy and affection of those she loved. To obtain this, she was unwearied, nay, prodigal, in her endeavors to please and serve. Her generosity was a ready prompter, while her sensibility enlightened her. She sought love and not applause, and she obtained both from all who knew her. To sum up all with the mention of a defect, though she could feel the dignity which an adherence to the dictates of duty imparts, yet sometimes going wrong, sometimes wounded by censure, and always keenly alive to blame, she had a good deal of timidity in her character. She was so susceptible to pain that she feared it too much, too agonizingly, and this terror of meeting anything harsh or grating in her path rendered her too diffident of herself, too submissive to authority, too miserable, and too yielding when anything disturbed the harmony with which she desired to be surrounded. It was these last qualities, probably, that led her to accept Mr. Neville's offer. Her father wished it, and she obeyed. He was a retired lieutenant in the Navy. Sir Boyville got him raised to the rank of post-captain, and what naval officer but would feel unbounded gratitude for such a favor? He was appointed to a ship, sailed, and fell in an engagement not many months after his daughter's marriage, grateful, even in his last moments, that he died commanding the deck of a man-of-war. Meanwhile his daughter bore the effects of his promotion in a less gratifying way. Yet, at first, she loved and esteemed her husband. He was not then what he is now. He was handsome, and his good breeding had the polish of the day. He was popular through a sort of liveliness which passes for wit, though it was rather a conventional ease in conversation than the sparkle of real intellect. Besides, he loved her to idolatry. Whatever he is now, still vehemence of passion forms his characteristic, and though the selfishness of his disposition gave an evil bias even to his love, yet it was there, and for a time it shed its delusions over his real character. While her artless and sweet caresses could create smiles, while he played the slave at her feet, or folded her in his arms with genuine and undisguised transport, even his darker nature was adorned by the, to him, alien and transitory magic of love. But marriage too soon changed Sir Boyville for the worse. Close intimacy disclosed the distortions of his character. He was a vain and a selfish man. Both qualities rendered him exacting in the extreme, and the first gave birth to the most outrageous jealousy. Elizabeth was too ingenuous for him to be able to entertain suspicions, but his jealousy was nourished by the difference of their age and temper. She was 19, in the first bloom of loveliness, in the freshest spring of youthful spirits, too innocent to suspect his doubts, too kind in her most joyous hour to fancy that she could offend. He was a man of the world, 1,000 times had seen men duped and women deceive. He did not know of the existence of a truth as spotless and uncompromising as existed in Elizabeth's bosom. He imagined that he was marked out as the old husband of a young wife. He feared that she would learn that she might have married more happily, and desirous of engrossing her all to himself, a smile spent on another was treason to the absolute nature of his rights. At first, she was blind to his bad qualities. 1,000 times he frowned when she was gay. 1,000 times ill humor and cutting reproofs were the results of her appearing charming to others, before she discovered the selfish and contemptible nature of his passion and became aware that, to please him, she must blight and uproot all her accomplishments, all her fascinations, that she must forever curb her wish to spread happiness around, that she, the very soul of generous, unsuspecting goodness, must become cramped in a sort of bed of Procrustes, now having one portion lopped off, and then another, till the maimed and half-alive remnant should resemble the soulless, niggard tyrant, whose every thought and feeling centered in his Lilliputian self. That she did at last make this discovery cannot be doubted, though she never disclosed her disappointment, nor complained of the tyranny from which she suffered. She grew heedful not to displease, guarded in her behavior to others, and so accommodated her manner to his wishes as showed that she feared, but concealed that she no longer esteemed him. A new reserve sprang up in her character, which, after all, was not reserve, for it was only the result of her fear to give pain and of her unalterable principles. Had she spoken of her husband's faults, it would have been to himself, but she had no spirit of governing, and quarreling and contention were the antipodes of her nature. If, indeed, this silent yielding to her husband's despotism was contrary to her original frankness, it was a sacrifice made to what she esteemed her duty, and never went beyond the silence which best becomes the injured. It cannot be doubted that she was alive to her husband's faults. Generous, she was restrained by his selfishness. Enthusiastic, she was chilled by his worldly wisdom. Sympathetic, she was rebuked by a jealousy that demanded every feeling. She was like a poor bird that with untired wing would mount gaily to the skies, when on each side the wires of the aviary impede its flight. Still it was her principle that we ought not to endeavor to form a destiny for ourselves, but to act well our part on the scene where Providence has placed us. She reflected seriously, and perhaps sadly, for the first time in her life, and she formed a system for herself, which would give the largest extent to the exercise of her natural benevolence, and yet obviate the suspicions and cure the fears of her narrow-minded, self-engrossed husband. In pursuance of her scheme, she made it her request that they should take up their residence entirely at their seat in the north of England, giving up London society and transforming herself altogether into a country lady. In her benevolent schemes, in the good she could there do, and in the few friends she could gather round her, against whom her husband could form no possible objection, she felt certain of possessing a considerable share of rational happiness, exempt from the hurry and excitement of town, for which her sensitive and ardent mind rendered her very unfit, under the guidance of a man who at once desired that she should hold a foremost place, and was yet disturbed by the admiration which she elicited. Sir Boyvill complied with seeming reluctance, but real exultation. He possesses a delightful seat in the southern part of Cumberland. Here, amid a simple-hearted peasantry, and in a neighborhood where she could cultivate many social pleasures, she gave herself up to a life which would have been one of extreme happiness, had not the exactions, the selfishness, the uncongenial mind of Sir Boyvill debarred her from the dearest blessings of all sympathy and friendship with the partner of her life. Still she was contented. Her temper was sweet and yielding. She did not look on each cross in circumstance as an injury or a misfortune, but rather as a call on her philosophy, which it was her duty to meet cheerfully. Her heart was too warm not to shrink with pain from her husband's ungenerous nature, but she had a resource to which she gave herself up with ardor. She turned the full but checked tide of affections from her husband to her son. Gerard was all in all to her, her hope, her joy, her idol, and he returned her love with more than a child's affection. His sensibility developed early, and she cultivated it perhaps too much. She wished to secure a friend, and the temptation afforded by the singular affectionateness of his disposition and his great intelligence was too strong. Mr. Neville strongly objected to the excess to which she carried her maternal cares, and augured ill of the boy's devotion to her. But here his interference was vain, the mother could not alter, and the child, standing at her side, eyed his father even then with a sort of proud indignation, on his daring to step in between them. To Mrs. Neville, this boy was as an angel sent to comfort her. She could not bear that anyone should attend on him except herself. She was his playmate and instructress. When he opened his eyes from sleep, his mother's face was the first he saw. She hushed him to rest at night. Did he hurt himself? She flew to his side in agony. Did she utter one word of tender reproach? It curbed his childish passions on the instant. He seldom left her side, but she was young enough to share his pastimes. Her heart overflowed with its excess of love, and he, even as a mere child, regarded her as something to protect, as well as worship. Mr. Neville was angry, and often reproved her too great partiality, though by degrees it won some favor in his eyes. Gerard was his son and heir, and he might be supposed to have a share in the affection lavished on him. He respected, also, the absence of frivolous vanity that led her to be happy with her child, contented away from London, satisfied in fulfilling the duties of her station, though his eyes only were there to admire. He persuaded himself that there must exist much latent attachment towards himself to reconcile her to this sort of exile, and her disinterestedness received the reward of his confidence. He who never before believed or respected woman. He began to yield to her more than he was wont, and to consider that he ought now and then to show some approbation of her conduct. When Gerard was about 6 years old, they went abroad on a tour. Travelling was a mode of passing the time that accorded well with Mr. Neville's matrimonial view of keeping his wife to himself. In the travelling carriage, he only was beside her. In seeing sights, he, who had visited Italy before and had some taste, could guide and instruct her, and short as their stay in each town was, there was no possibility of forming serious attachments or lasting friendships. At the same time, his vanity was gratified by seeing his wife and son admired by strangers and natives. While abroad, Mrs. Neville bore another child, a little girl. This added greatly to her domestic happiness. Her husband grew extremely fond of his baby daughter. There was too much difference of age to set her up as a rival to Gerard. She was by contradistinction the father's darling, it is true, but this rather produced harmony than discord, for the mother loved both children too well to feel hurt by the preference, and softened by having an object he really loved to lavish his favor on. Sir Boyville grew much more of a tender father and indulgent husband than he had hitherto shown himself. Chapter 17. It was not until a year after their return from abroad that the events happened, which terminated so disastrously Mrs. Neville's career in her own family. I am perplexed how to begin the narration. The story is so confused and obscure, the mystery that envelops the catastrophe so impenetrable, the circumstances that we really know so few, and these gleaned, as it were, ear by ear, as dropped in the passage of the event, so making, if you will excuse my rustic metaphor, a meager, ill-assorted sheaf. Mrs. Neville had been a wife nearly 10 years. Never had she done one act that could be disapproved by the most circumspect. Never had she swerved from that veracity and open line of conduct which was a safeguard against the mingled ardor and timidity of her disposition. It required extraordinary circumstances to taint her reputation, as, to say the least, it is tainted, and we are still in the dark as to the main instrument by which these circumstances were brought about. Their result is too obvious. At one moment Mrs. Neville was an honored and beloved wife, a mother whose heart's pulsations depended on the well-being of her children, and whose fond affection was to them as the sun's warmth to the opening flower. At the next, where is she? Silence and mystery wrap her from us, and surmise is busy in tracing shapes of infamy from the fragments of truth that we can gather. On the return of the family from abroad, they again repaired to their seat of Dromore, and at the time to which I allude, Mr. Neville had left them there to go to London on business. He went for a week, but his stay was prolonged to nearly 2 months. he heard regularly from his wife. Her letters were more full of her children and household than herself, but they were kind, and her maternal heart warmed, as she wrote, into anticipations of future happiness in her children, greater even than she now enjoyed. Every line breathed of home and peace. Every word seemed to emanate from a mind in which lurked no concealed feeling, no one thought unconfessed or unapproved. To such a home, cheered by so much beauty and excellence, Sir Boyvill returned, as he declares, with eager and grateful affection. The time came when he was expected at home, and true, both to the day and to the hour, he arrived. It was at 11 at night. His carriage drove through the grounds. The doors of the house were thrown open. Several eager faces were thrust forward with more of curiosity and anxiety than is at all usual in an English household, and as he alighted, the servants looked aghast and exchanged glances of terror. The truth was soon divulged. At about 6 in the evening, Mrs. Neville, who dined early in the absence of her husband, had gone to walk in the park with Gerard. Since then, neither had returned. When the darkness, which closed in with a furious wind and thunderstorm, rendered her prolonged absence a matter of solicitude, the servants had gone to seek her in the grounds. They found their mistress's key in the lock of a small masked gate that opened on a green lane. They went one way up the lane to meet her, but found no trace. They followed the other, with like ill success. Again they searched the park with more care, and again resorted to the lanes and fields, but in vain. The obvious idea was that she had taken shelter from the storm, and a horrible fear presented itself that she might have found no better retreat than a tree or hayrick, and that she had been struck by the lightning. A slight hope remained that she had gone along the high road to meet her husband and would return with him. His arrival alone took from them this last hope. The country was now raised. Servants and tenants were sent divers ways, some on horseback, some on foot. Though summertime, the night was inclement and tempestuous. A furious west wind swept the earth. High trees were bowed to the ground, and the blast howled and roared, at once baffling and braving every attempt to hear cries or distinguish sounds. Dramore is situated in a beautiful, but wild and thinly inhabited part of Cumberland, on the verge of the plain that forms the coast, where it first breaks into uplands, dingles, and ravines. There is no high road towards the sea, but as they took the one that led to Lancaster, they approached the ocean, and the distant roar of its breakers filled up the pauses of the gale. It was on this road, at the distance of some 5 miles from the house, that Gerard was found. He was lying on the road in a sort of stupor, which could be hardly called sleep. His clothes were drenched by the storm, and his limbs stiff from cold. When first found and disturbed, he looked wildly around, and his cry was for his mother. Terror was painted in his face, and his intellect seemed deranged by a sudden and terrific shock. He was taken home. His father hurried to him, questioning him eagerly, but the child only raved that his mother was being carried from him, and his pathetic cry of "Come back, Mama, stop, stop for me," filled everyone with terror and amazement. As speedily as possible, medical assistance was sent for. The physician found the boy in a high fever, the result of fright, exposure to the storm, and subsequent sleep in his wet clothes in the open air. It was many days before his life could be answered for or the delirium left him, and still he raved that his mother was being carried off and would not stop for him, and often he tried to rise from his bed under the notion of pursuing her. At length consciousness returned, consciousness of the actual objects around him, mingled with an indistinct recollection of the events that immediately preceded his illness. His pulse was calm, his reason restored, and he lay quietly with open eyes fixed on the door of his chamber. At last he showed symptoms of uneasiness and asked for his mother. Mr. Neville was called, as he had desired he might be the moment his son showed signs of being rational. Gerard looked up in his father's face with an expression of disappointment and again murmured, "Send Mama to me." Fearful of renewing his fever by awakening his disquietude, his father told him that Mama was tired and asleep and could not be disturbed. "Then she has come back," he cried. "That man did not take her quite away. The carriage drove here at last." Such words renewed all their consternation. Afraid of questioning the child himself, lest he should terrify him, Mr. Neville sent the nurse who had been with him from infancy to extract information. His story was wild and strange, and here I must remark that the account drawn from him by the woman's questions differs somewhat from that to which he afterward adhered, though not so much in actual circumstances as in the coloring given. This his father attributes to his subsequent endeavors to clear his mother from blame, while he asserts, and I believe with truth, that time and knowledge, by giving him an insight into motives, threw a new light on the words and actions which he remembered, and that circumstances which bore one aspect to his ignorance became clearly visible in another, when he was able to understand the real meaning of several fragments of conversation which had at first been devoid of sense. All that he could tell during this first stage of inquiry was that his mother had taken him to walk with her in the grounds, that she had unlocked the gate that opened out on the lane with her own key, and that a gentleman was without waiting. Had he ever seen the gentleman before? Never. He did not know him, and the stranger took no notice of him. He heard his mamma call him Rupert. His mother took the stranger's arm and walked on through the lane, while he sometimes ran on before and sometimes remained at her side. They conversed earnestly, and his mother at one time cried. He, Gerard, felt very angry with the gentleman for making her cry, and took her hand, and begged her to leave him and come away. But she kissed the boy, told him to run on, and they would return very soon. Yet they did not return, but walked on to where the lane was intersected by the high road. Here they stopped and continued to converse, but it seemed as if she were saying goodbye to the stranger when a carriage, driven at full speed, was seen approaching. It stopped close to them. It was an open carriage, a sort of calèche, with the head pulled forward low down. As it stopped, his mother went up to it, when the stranger, pulling the child's hand from hers, hurried her into the carriage and sprang in after, crying out to him, "Jump in, my boy." But before he could do so, the postilion whipped the horses, who started forward almost with a bound, and were in a gallop on the instant. He heard his mother scream. The words, "My child, my son," reached his ears, shrieked in agony. He ran wildly after the carriage. It disappeared, but still he ran on. It must stop somewhere, and he would reach it. His mother had called for him, and thus, crying, breathless, panting, he ran along the high road. The carriage had long been out of sight. The sun had set. The wind, rising in gusts, brought on the thunderstorm. Yet still he pursued, till nature and his boyish strength gave way, and he threw himself on the ground. To gain breath, at every sound which he fancied might be that of carriage wheels, he started up. But it was only the howling of the blast in the trees and the hoarse muttering of the now distant thunder. Twice and thrice he rose from the earth and ran forward, till, wet through and utterly exhausted, he lay on the ground, weeping bitterly and expecting to die. This was all his story. It produced a strict inquiry among the servants, and then circumstances scarcely adverted to were remembered, and some sort of information gained. About a week or 10 days before, a gentleman on horseback, unattended by any servant, had called. He asked for Mrs. Neville. The servant requested his name, but he muttered that it was no matter. He was ushered into the room where their mistress was sitting. He stayed at least 2 hours, and when he was gone, they remarked that her eyes were red, as if she had been weeping. The stranger called again, and Mrs. Neville was denied to him. Inquiries were now instituted in the neighborhood. 1 or 2 persons remembered something of a stranger gentleman who had been seen riding about the country, mounted on a fine bay horse. One evening he was seen coming from the masked gate in the park, which caused it to be believed that he was on a visit at Dramore. Nothing more was known of him. The servants tasked themselves to remember more particularly the actions of their lady, and it was remembered that one evening she went to walk alone in the grounds, some accident having prevented Gerard from accompanying her. She returned very late, at 10 o'clock, and there was, her maid declared, a good deal of confusion in her manner. She threw herself on a sofa, ordered the lights to be taken away, and remained alone for 2 hours, past her usual time for retiring for the night, till at last her maid ventured in to ask her if she needed anything. She was awake, and when lights were brought, had evidently been weeping. After this she only went out in the carriage with the children until the fatal night of her disappearance. It was remembered also that she received several letters brought by a strange man who left them without waiting for any answer. She received one the very morning of the day when she left her home, and this last note was found. It threw some light on the fatal mystery. It was only dated with the day of the week and began abruptly. On one condition I will obey you. I will never see you more. I will leave the country. I will forget my threats against the most hated life in the world. He is safe on one condition. You must meet me this evening. I desire to see you for the last time. Come to the gate of your park that opens on the lane, which you opened for me a few nights ago. You will find me waiting outside. I will not detain you long. A farewell to you and to my just revenge shall be breathed at once. If you do not come, I will wait till night, till I am past hope, and then enter your grounds, wait till he returns, and oh, do not force me to say what you will call wicked and worse than unkind, but come and prevent all ill. I charge you come, and hereafter you shall, if you please, be forever delivered from your Rupert. On this letter she went, yet in innocence, for she took her child with her. Could any one doubt that she was betrayed, carried off, the victim of the foulest treachery? No one did doubt it. Police were sent from London, the country searched, the most minute inquiries set on foot. Sometimes it was supposed that a clue was found, but in the end all failed. Month after month passed, hope became despair, pity merged into surmise, and condemnation quickly followed. If she had been carried forcibly from her home, still, she could not forever be imprisoned and debarred from all possibility at least of writing. She might have sent tidings from the ends of the earth. Nay, it was madness to think that she could be carried far against her own will. In any town, in any village, she might appeal to the justice and humanity of her fellow creatures and be set free. She would not have remained with the man of violence who had torn her away, unless she had at last become a party in his act and lost all right to return to her husband's roof. Such suspicions began to creep about, rather felt in men's minds than inferred in their speech, till her husband first uttered the fatal word. And then, as if set free from a spell, each one was full of indignation at her dereliction and his injuries. Sir Boyvill was beyond all men vain, vanity rendered him liable to jealousy, and when jealous, full of sore and angry feelings. His selfishness and unforgiving nature, which had been neutralized by his wife's virtues, now, quickened by the idea of her guilt, burst forth and engrossed every other emotion. He was injured there, where the pride of man is most accessible, branded by pity, the tale of the world. He had feared such a catastrophe during the first years of his wedded life, being conscious of the difference which age and nature had placed between him and his wife. In the recesses of his heart, he had felt deeply grateful to her for having dissipated these fears. From the moment that her prudent conduct had made him secure, he had become another man, as far as his defective nature and narrow mind permitted. He had grown virtuous and disinterested, but this fabric of good qualities was the result of her influence, and it was swept away and utterly erased from the moment she left him, and that love and esteem were exchanged for contempt and hatred. Soon, very soon, had doubts of his wife's allegiance and a suspicion of her connivance insinuated themselves. Like all evilly inclined persons, he jumped at once into a belief of the worst. Her taking her son with her was a mere contrivance, or worse, since her design had probably been to carry him with her, a design frustrated by accident and the lukewarmness of her lover on that point. The letter left behind he looked on as a fabrication, left there to gloss over her conduct. He forgot her patient goodness, her purity of soul, her devoted attachment to her children, her truth, and attributed at once the basest artifice, the grossest want of feeling. Want of feeling in her, she whose pulses quickened and whose blushes were called up at a word, she who idolized her child even to a fault, and whose tender sympathy was alive to every call. But these demonstrations of sensibility grew into accusations. Her very goodness and guarded propriety were against her. Why appear so perfect, except to blind? Why seclude herself, except from fears which real virtue need never entertain? Why foster the morbid sensibility of her child, except from a craving for that excitement which is a token of depravity? In this bad world, we are apt to consider every deviation from stony apathy as tending at last to the indulgence of passions against which society has declared a ban. And thus with poor Elitha, all could see, it was said, that a nature so sensitive must end in ill at last, and that, if tempted, she must yield to an influence which few, even of the coldest natures, can resist. While Sir Boyvill revolved these thoughts, he grew gloomy and sullen. At first his increased unhappiness was attributed to sorrow, but a little word betrayed the real source, a little word that named his wife with scorn. That word turned the tide of public feeling, and she, who had been pitied and wept as dead, was now regarded as a voluntary deserter from her home. Her virtues were remembered against her, and surmises, which before would have been reprobated almost as blasphemy, became current as undoubted truths. It was long before Gerard became aware of this altered feeling. The minds of children are such a mystery to us. They are so blank, yet so susceptible of impression, that the point where ignorance ends and knowledge is perfected is an enigma often impossible to solve. From the time that he rose from his sickbed, the boy was perpetually on the watch for intelligence, eagerly inquiring what discoveries were made, what means were used for, what hopes entertained of, his mother's rescue. He had asked his father whether he should not be justified in shooting the villain who had stolen her if ever he met him. He had shed tears of sorrow and pity until indignation swallowed up each softer feeling, and a desire to succor and to avenge became paramount. His dear, dear mother, that she should be away, kept from him by force, that he could not find, not get at her, were ideas to incense his young heart to its very height of impatience and rage. Everyone seemed too tame, too devoid of expedience and energy. It appeared an easy thing to measure the whole earth, step by step, and inch by inch, leaving no portion uninspected till she was found and liberated. He longed to set off on such an expedition. It was his dream by night and day, and he communicated these bursting feelings to everyone with an overflowing eloquence, inexpressibly touching from its truth and earnestness. Suddenly he felt the change. Perhaps some officious domestic suggested the idea. He says himself, it came on him as infection may be caught by one who enters an hospital. He saw it in the eyes, he felt it in the air and manner of all. His mother was believed to be a voluntary fugitive. Of her own accord she went, and never would return. At the thought his heart grew sick within him. To see his nobleness, conceiving the dishonor of his mother. He straight declined upont, drooped, took it deeply, fastened and fixed the shame on't in himself, threw off his spirit, his appetite, his sleep, and downright languished. He refused food, and turned in disgust from every former pursuit. Hitherto he had ardently longed for the return of his mother, and it seemed to him that, give his limbs but a manlier growth, let a few years go over, and he should find and bring her back in triumph. But that contumely and disgrace should fall on that dear mother's head. How could he avert that? The evil was remediless, and death was slight in comparison. One day he walked up to his father, and fixing his clear young eyes upon him, said, I know what you think, but it is not true. Mamma would come back if she could. When I am a man, I will find and bring her back, and you will be sorry then. What more he would have said was lost in sobs. His heart had beat impetuously as he had worked on himself to address his father and assert his mother's truth. But the consciousness that she was indeed gone, and that for years there was no hope of seeing her, broke in. His throat swelled, he felt suffocated, and fell down in a fit. Chapter 18. Lady Cecil had broken off her tale on their return from their morning drive. She resumed it in the evening, as she and Elizabeth sat looking on the summer woods, and the soft but dim twilight better accorded with her melancholy story. Poor Gerard, his young heart was almost broken by struggling passions and the want of tenderness in those about him. After this scene with his father, his life was again in the greatest danger for some days, but at last health of body returned. He lay on his little couch, pale and wasted, an altered child, but his heart was the same, and he adhered tenaciously to one idea. Nurse, he said one day to the woman who had attended him from his birth, I wish you would take pen and paper and write down what I am going to say. Or, if that is too much trouble, I wish you would remember every word and repeat it to my father. I cannot speak to him. He does not love Mamma as he used. He is unjust, and I cannot speak to him. But I wish to tell every little thing that happened, that people may see that what I say is true, and be as sure as I am that Mamma never meant to go away. Met the strange gentleman first. We walked along the lane, and I ran about gathering flowers. Yet I remember I kept thinking, why is Mamma offended with that gentleman? What right has he to displease her? And I came back with it in my mind to tell him that he should not say anything to annoy Mamma, But when I took her hand, she seemed no longer angry, but very, very sorry. I remember she said, "I grieve deeply for you, Rupert." And then she added, "My good wishes are all I have to give." I remember the words, for they made me fancy, in a most childish manner, Mama must have left her purse at home, and I began to think of my own. But seeing him so well dressed, I felt a few shillings would do him no good. Mama talked on very softly, looking up in the stranger's face. He was tall, taller, younger, and better looking than Papa, and I ran on again, for I did not know what they were talking about. At one time Mama called me and said she would go back, and I was very glad, for it was growing late, and I felt hungry, but the stranger said, "Only a little farther to the end of the lane only." So we walked on, and he talked about her forgetting him, and she said something that was best, and he ought to forget her. On this he burst forth very angrily, and I grew angry too, but he changed and asked her to forgive him, and so we reached the end of the lane. We stopped there, and Mama held out her hand and said, "Farewell," and something more, when suddenly we heard the sound of wheels, and a carriage came at full speed round from a turn in the road. It stopped close to us, her hand trembled which held mine, and the stranger said, "You see I said true, I am going, and shall soon be far distant. I ask but for 1/2 hour, sit in the carriage, it is getting cold." Mama said, "No, no, it is late, farewell," but as she spoke the stranger as it were led her forward, and in a moment lifted her up. He seemed stronger than any two men, and put her in the carriage, and got in himself, crying to me to jump after, which I would have done, but the postilion whipped the horses. I was thrown almost under the wheel by the sudden motion. I heard Mama scream, but when I got up the carriage was already a long way off, and though I called as loud as I could, and ran after it, it never stopped, and the horses were going at full gallop. I ran on thinking it would stop or turn back, and I cried out on Mama, while I ran so fast that I was soon breathless, and she was out of hearing, and then I shrieked and cried, and threw myself on the ground, till I thought I heard wheels, and I got up and ran again, but it was only the thunder, and that pealed, and the wind roared, and the rain came down, and I could keep my feet no longer, but fell on the ground and forgot everything, except that Mama must come back, and I was watching for her. And this, nurse, is my story, every word is true, and is it not plain that Mama was carried away by force? "Yes," said the woman, "no one doubts that, Master Gerard, but why does she not come back? No man could keep her against her will in a Christian country like this." "Because she is dead or in prison," cried the boy, bursting into tears. "But I see you are as wicked as everybody else, and have wicked thoughts too, and I hate you and everybody except Mama." From that time Gerard was entirely altered. His boyish spirit was dashed. He brooded perpetually over the wrong done his mother, and was irritated to madness by feeling that by a look and a word he could not make others share his belief in her spotless innocence. He became sullen, shy, shut up in himself. Above all, he shunned his father. Months passed away. Requisitions, set on foot at first from a desire to succor, were continued from a resolve to revenge. No pains or expense were spared to discover the fugitives, and all in vain. The opinion took root that they had fled to America, and who on that vast continent could find two beings resolved on concealment? Inquiries were made at New York and other principal towns, but all in vain. The strangest and most baffling circumstance in this mystery was that no guess could be formed as to who the stranger was. Though he seemed to have dropped from the clouds, he had evidently been known long before to Mrs. Neville. His name, it appeared, was Rupert. No one knew of any bearing that name. Had Ally loved before her marriage? Such a circumstance must have been carefully hidden, for her husband had never suspected it. Her childhood had been spent with her mother, her father being mostly at sea. When 16, she lost her mother, and after a short interval resided with her father, then retired from service. He had assured Sir Boyville that his daughter had never loved, and the husband, jealous as he was, had never seen cause to doubt the truth of this statement. Had she formed any attachment during the first years of her married life? Was it to escape the temptation so held out that she secluded herself in the country? Rupert was probably a feigned name, and Sir Boyville tried to recollect who her favourites were, so to find a clue by their actions to her disappearance. It was in vain that he called to mind every minute's circumstance and pondered over the name of each visitor. He could remember nothing that helped discovery. Yet the idea that she had, several years ago, conceived a partiality for some man who, as it proved, loved her to distraction, became fixed in Sir Boyvill's mind. The thought poured venom on the time gone by. It might have been a virtue in her to banish him she loved and to seclude herself, but this mystery, where all seemed so frank and open, this defalcation of the heart, this inward thought which made no sign, yet ruled every action, was gall and wormwood to her proud, susceptible husband. That in her secret soul she loved this other was manifest, for though it might be admitted that he used art and violence to tear her from her home, yet in the end she was vanquished, and even maternal duties and affections sacrificed to irresistible passion. Can you wonder that such a man as Sir Boyvill, ever engrossed by the mighty idea of self, yet fearful that that self should receive the minutest wound, proud of his wife, because, being so lovely and so admired, she was all his, grateful to her, for being so glorious and enviable a possession, can you wonder that this vain but sensitive man should be wound up to the height of jealous rage by the loss of such a good, accompanied by circumstances of deception and dishonor? He had been fond of his wife in return for her affection, while she in reality loved another. He had respected the perfection of her truth, and there was falsehood at the core. Had she avowed the traitor passion, declared her struggles, and laying bare her heart, confessed that, while she preferred his honor and happiness, yet in the weakness of her nature another had stolen a portion of that sentiment which she desired to consecrate to him, then with what tenderness he had forgiven her, with what soothing forbearance he had borne her fault, how magnanimous and merciful he had shown himself. But she had acted the generous part. Thanks had come from him, the shows of obligation from her. He fancied that he held a flower in his hand, from which the sweetest perfume alone could be extracted, but the germ was blighted, and the very core turned to bitter ashes and dust. Such a theme is painful. Howsoever we view it, it is scarcely possible to imagine any event in life more desolating. To be happy is to attain one's wishes, and to look forward to the lastingness of their possession. Sir Boyvill had long been skeptical and distrusting, but at last he was brought to believe that he had drawn the fortunate ticket, that his wife's faith was a pure and perfect chrysolite, and if in his heart he deemed that she did not regard him with all the reverence that was his due, if she did not nurture all the pride of place and disdain of her fellow creatures which he thought that his wife ought to feel, yet her many charms and virtues left him no room for complaint. Her sensibility, her vivacity, her wit, her accomplishments, her exceeding loveliness, they were all undeniably his, and all made her a piece of enchantment. This merit was laid low, deprived of its crown, her fidelity to him, and the selfish, the heartless, and the cold whom she reproved and disliked were lifted to the eminence of virtue, while she lay fallen, degraded, worthless. Sir Boyvill was, in his own conceit, forever placed on a pedestal, and he loved to imagine that he could say, "Look at me, you can see no defect. I am a wealthy and a well-born man. I have a wife the envy of all, children who promise to inherit all our virtues. I am prosperous, no harm can reach me, look at me." He was still on his pedestal, but had become a mark for scorn, for pity. Oh, how he loathed himself, how he abhorred her who had brought him to this pass. He had, in her best days, often fancied that he loved her too well, yielded too often his pride, nurtured schemes to her soft persuasions. He had indeed believed that Providence had created this exquisite and most beautiful being, that life might be made perfect to him. Besides, his months and days and hours had been replete with her image, her very admirable qualities, accompanied as they were by the trembling delicacy that droops at a touch, and then revives at a word, her quickness, not of temper but of feeling, which received such sudden and powerful impression, formed her to be at once admired and cherished with the care a sweet exotic needs, when transplanted from its sunny, native clime to the ungenial temperature of a northern land. It was madness to recollect all the fears he had wasted on her. He had foregone the dignity of manhood to wait on her. He had often feared to pursue his projects, lest they should jar some delicate chord in her frame. To his own recollection, it seemed that he had become but the lackey to her behests, and all for the sake of a love which she bestowed on another, to preserve that honor which she blasted without pity. Were in vain to attempt to delineate the full force of jealousy. Natural sorrow at losing a thing so sweet and dear was blended with anger that he should be thrown off by her. The misery of knowing that he should never see her more was mingled with a ferocious desire to learn that every disaster was heaped on one whom hitherto he had, as well as he could, guarded from every ill. To this, we may add commiseration for his deserted children. His son, late so animated, so free, spirited, and joyous, a more promising child had never blessed a father's hopes, was changed into a brooding, grief-struck, blighted visionary. His little girl, the very thing he loved best of all, she was taken from him. The carelessness of a nurse during a childish illness caused her death, within a year after her mother's flight. Had that mother remained, such carelessness had been impossible. Sir Boyvill felt that all good fell from him, the only remaining golden fruit dropped from the tree. Calamity encompassed him. With his whole soul he abhorred and desired to wreak vengeance on her who caused the ill. After 2 years were past, and no tidings were received of the fugitives, it seemed plain that there could be but one solution to the mystery. No doubt she and her lover concealed themselves in some far land, under a feigned name. If indeed it were, if it be so, it might move any heart to imagine poor Elizabeth's misery, the obloquy that mantles over her remembrance at home, while she broods over the desolation of the hearth she so long adorned, and the pining, impatient anguish of her beloved boy. What could or can keep her away is matter of fearful conjecture, but this much is certain, that at that time at least, and now, if she survives, she must be miserable. Sir Boyvill, if he deigned to recollect these things, enjoyed the idea of her anguish, but without adverting to her state and feelings, he was desirous of obtaining what reparation he could, and to dispossess her of his name. Endeavors to find the fugitives in America and false hopes held out had delayed the process. He at last entered on it with eagerness. 1,000 obvious reasons rendered a divorce desirable, and to him, with all his pride, then only would his pillow be without a thorn, when she lost his name and every right or tie that bound them together. Under the singular circumstances of the case, he could only obtain a divorce by a bill in Parliament, and to this measure he resorted. There was nothing reprehensible in this step. Self-defense, as well as revenge, suggested its expediency. Besides this, it may be said that he was glad of the publicity that would ensue, that he might be proved blameless to all the world. He accused his wife of a fault so great as tarnished irrecoverably her golden name. He accused her of being a false wife and an unnatural mother, under circumstances of no common delinquency. But he might be mistaken. He might view his injuries with the eye of passion, and others, more disinterested, might pronounce that she was unfortunate, but not guilty. By means of the bill for divorce, the truth would be investigated and judged by several hundred of the best-born and best-educated of his countrymen. The publicity, also, might induce discovery. It was fair and just, and though his pride rebelled against becoming the tale of the day, he saw no alternative. Indeed, it was reported to him by some officious friend that many had observed that it was strange that he had not sought this remedy before. Something of wonder, or blame, or both, was attached to his passiveness. Such hints galled him to the quick, and he pursued his purpose with all the obstinacy and imperious haste peculiar to him. When every other preliminary had been gone through, it was deemed necessary that Gerard should give his evidence at the bar of the House of Lords. Sir Boyvill looked upon his lost wife as a criminal, so steeped in deserved infamy, so odious, and so justly condemned, that none could hesitate in siding with him to free him from the bondage of those laws, which, while she bore his name, might be productive of incalculable injury. His honor, too, was wounded. His honor, which he would have sacrificed his life to have preserved untainted, he had entrusted to Elizabeth, and loved her the more fervently that she regarded the trust with reverence. She had foully betrayed it, and must not all who respected the world's customs and the laws of social life, above all, must not any who loved him be forward to cast her out from any inheritance of good that could reach her through him. Above all, must not their son, his son, share his indignation and assist his revenge. Gerard was but a boy, but his mother's tenderness, his own quick nature, and lastly, the sufferings he had endured through her flight, had early developed a knowledge of the realities of life, and so keen a sense of right and justice as made his father regard him as capable of forming opinions and acting from such motives as usually are little understood by one so young. And true it was that Gerard fostered sentiments independent of any teaching, and cherished ideas the more obstinately because they were confined to his single breast. He understood the pity with which his father was regarded, the stigma cast upon his mother, the suppressed voice, the wink of the eye, the covert hint. He understood it all, and like the poet, longed for a word, sharp as a sword, to pierce the falsehood through and through. For many months, he and his father had seen little of each other. Sir Boyvill had not a mind that takes pleasure in watching the ingenuous sallies of childhood or the development of the youthful mind. The idea of making a friend of his child, which had been Alytha's fond and earnest aim, could never occur to his self-engrossed heart. Since his illness, Gerard had been weakly, or he would have been sent to school. As it was, a tutor resided in the house. This person was written to by Sir Boyvill's man of business and directed to break the matter to his pupil, to explain the formalities, to soothe and encourage any timidity he might show, and to incite him, if need were, to a desire to assist in a measure, whose operation was to render justice to his father. The first allusion to his mother, made by Mr. Carter, caused the blood to rush from the boy's heart, and to dye crimson his cheeks, his temples, his throat. Then he grew deadly pale, and without uttering a word, listened to his preceptor, till suddenly taking in the nature of the task assigned to him. Every limb shook, and he answered by a simple request to be left alone, and he would consider. No more was thought by the unapprehensive people about, than that he was shy of being spoken to on the subject, that he would make up his mind in his own way, and Mr. Carter at once yielded to his request. The reserve which had shrouded him since he lost his mother had accustomed those about him to habitual silence. No one watchful, attached, intelligent eye marked the struggles which shook his delicate frame, blanched his cheek, took the flesh from his bones, and quickened his pulse into fever. None marked him as he lay in bed the livelong night, with open eyes and beating heart a prey to contending emotion. He was passed carelessly by as he lay on the dewy grass from morn to evening, his soul torn by grief, uttering his mother's name in accents of despair and shedding floods of tears. I said that these signs of intense feeling were not remarked, and yet they were, in a vulgar way, by the menials, who said it would be well when the affair was over. Master Neville took it so to heart, and was sadly frightened. Frightened. Such a coarse, undistinguishing name was given to the sacred terror of doing his still-loved mother an injury, which heaved his breast with convulsive sobs and filled his veins with fire. The thought of what he was called upon to do haunted him day and night with agony. He, her nursling, her idol, her child, he who could not think of her name without tears, and dreamed often that she kissed him in his sleep, and woke to weep over the delusion. He was to accuse her before an assembled multitude, to give support to the most infamous falsehoods, to lend his voice to stigmatize her name, and wherever she was, kept from him by some irresistible power, but innocent as an angel and still. Loving him, she was to hear of him as her enemy and receive a last wound from his hand. Such appeared the task assigned to him in his eyes, for his blunt, witted tutor had spoken of the justice to be rendered his father, by freeing him from his fugitive wife, without regarding the inner heart of his pupil, or being aware that his mother sat throned there, an angel of light and goodness, the victim of ill, but doing none. Soon after Mrs. Neville's flight, the family had abandoned the seat in Cumberland and inhabited a house taken near the Thames in Buckinghamshire. Here Gerard resided, while his father was in town watching the progress of the bill. At last, the day drew near when Gerard's presence was required. The peers showed a disposition, either from curiosity or a love of justice, to sift the affair to the uttermost, and the boy's testimony was declared absolutely necessary. Mr. Carter told Gerard that on the following morning they were to proceed to London, in pursuance of the circumstances which he had explained to him a few days before. "Is it then true," said the boy, "that I am to be called upon to give evidence, as you call it, against my mother?" "You are called upon by every feeling of duty," replied the sapient preceptor, "to speak the truth to those whose decision will render justice to your father. If the truth injure Mrs. Neville, that is her affair." Again Gerard's cheeks burned with blushes, and his eyes, dimmed as they were with tears, flashed fire. "In that case," he said, "I beg to see my father." "You will see him when in town," replied Mr. Carter. "Come, Neville, you must not take the matter in this girlish style. Show yourself a man. Your mother is unworthy." "If you please, sir," said Gerard, half choked, yet restraining himself, "I will speak to my father. I do not like anyone else to talk to me about these things." "As you please, sir," said Mr. Carter, much offended. No more was said. It was evening. The next morning they set out for London. The poor boy had lain awake the whole night, but no one knew or cared for his painful vigils. Chapter 19. On the following day the journey was performed, and it had been arranged that Gerard should rest on the subsequent one, the third being fixed for his attendance in the House of Lords. Sir Boyvill had been informed how sullenly, that was the word they used, the boy had received the information conveyed him by his tutor. He would rather have been excused saying a word himself to his son on the subject, but this account, and the boy's request to see him, forced him to change his purpose. He did not expect opposition, but he wished to give a right turn to Gerard's expressions. The sort of cold distance that separation and variance of feeling produced rendered their intercourse little like the tender interchange of parental and filial love. "Gerard, my boy," Sir Boyvill began, "we are both sufferers, and you, like me, are not of a race tamely to endure injury. I would willingly have risked my life to revenge the ruin brought on us. So I believe would you, child as you are, but the skulking villain is safe from my arm. The laws of his country cannot even pursue him, yet what reparation is left, I must endeavour to get." Sir Boyvill showed tact in thus bringing forward only that party whose act none could do other than reprobate, and who was the object of Gerard's liveliest hatred. His face lightened up with something of pleasure, his eye flashed fire. To prove to the world the guilt and violence of the wretch who had torn his mother from him was indeed a task of duty and justice. Little more forbearance on his father's part had wound him easily to his will, but the policy Sir Boyvill displayed was involuntary, and his next words overturned all. "Your miserable mother," he continued, "must bear her share of infamy, and if she be not wholly hardened, it will prove a sufficient punishment. When the events of tomorrow reach her, she will begin to taste of the bitter cup she has dealt out so largely to others. It were folly to pretend to regret that. I own that I rejoice." Every idea now suffered revulsion, and the stream of feeling flowed again in its old channels. What right had his father to speak thus of the beloved and honored parent he had so cruelly lost? His blood boiled within him, and despite childish fear and reverence, he said, "If my mother will grieve or be injured by my appearing tomorrow, I will not go, I cannot." "You are a fool to speak thus," said his father, "a guileless animal without sense of pride or duty. Come, sir, no more of this. You owe me obedience, and you must pay it on this occasion. You are only bid speak the truth, and that you must speak. I had thought, notwithstanding your youth, higher and more generous motives might be urged, a father's honor vindicated, a mother's vileness punished." "My mother is not vile," cried Gerard, and there stopped, for 1,000 things restrain a child's tongue: inexperience, reverence, ignorance of the effect his words may produce, terror at the mightiness of the power with which he has to contend. After a pause, he muttered, "I honor my mother. I will tell the whole world that she deserves honor." "Now, Gerard, on my soul," cried Sir Boyvill, roused to anger, as parents too easily are against their offspring when they show any will of their own, while they expect to move them like puppets. "On my soul, my fine fellow, I could find it in my heart to knock you down. Enough of this. I don't want to terrify you. Be a good boy tomorrow, and I will forgive all." "Forgive me now, father," cried the youth, bursting into tears. "Forgive me and spare me. I cannot obey you. I cannot do anything that will grieve my mother. She loved me so much. I am sure she loves me still, that I cannot do her a harm. I will not go tomorrow." "This is most extraordinary," said Sir Boyvill, controlling as well as he could the rage swelling within him. "And are you such an idiot as not to know that your wretched mother has forfeited all claim to your affection? And am I of so little worth in your eyes, I, your father, who have a right to your obedience from the justice of my cause, not to speak of parental authority? Am I nothing? To receive no duty, expect no service. I was indeed mistaken. I thought you were older than your years, and had that touch of gentlemanly pride about you that would have made you eager to avenge my injuries, to stand by me as a friend and ally, compensating as well as you could for the wrongs done me by your mother. I thought I had a son in whose veins my own blood flowed, who would be ready to prove his true birth by siding with me. Are you stone, or a base-born thing, that you cannot even conceive what thing honor is?" Gerard listened, he wept. The tears poured in torrents from his eyes, but as his father continued, and heaped many an opprobrious epithet on him, a proud and sullen spirit was indeed awakened. He longed to say, "Abuse me, strike me, but I will not yield." Yet he did not speak. He dried his eyes and stood in silence before his parent, his face darkening and something ferocious gleaming in eyes hitherto so soft and sorrowing. Sir Boyvill saw that he was far from making the impression he desired, but he wished to avoid reiterated refusals to obey, and he summed up at last with vague but violent threats of what would ensue: exile from his home, penury, nay, starvation, the abhorrence of the world, his own malediction. And after having worked himself up into a towering rage and real detestation of the shivering, feeble, yet determined child before him, he left him to consider and to be vanquished. Far other thoughts occupied Gerard. "I had thought," he has told me, "once or twice to throw myself into his arms and pray for mercy, to kneel at his feet and implore him to spare me. One kind word had made the struggle intolerable, but no kind word did he say. And while he stormed, it seemed to me as if my dear mother were singing as she was used, while I gathered flowers and played beside her in the park, and I thought of her, not of him. The words, 'Kick me out of doors,' suggested but the idea, 'I shall be free and I will find my mother.' I feel intensely now, but surely a boy's feelings are far wilder, far more vehement than a man's, for I cannot now, violent as you think me, call up one sensation so whirlwind-like as those that possessed me while my father spoke." Thus has Gerard described his emotions. His father ordered him to quit the room, and he went to brood upon the fate impending over him. On the morrow early, he was bid prepare to attend the House of Lords. His father did not appear. He thought that the boy was terrified and would make no further resistance. Gerard, indeed, obeyed in silence. He disdained to argue with strangers and hirelings. He had an idea that if he openly rebelled, he might be carried by force, and his proud heart swelled at the idea of compulsion. He got into the carriage, and as he went, Mr. Carter, who was with him, thought it advisable to explain the forms and give some instructions. Gerard listened with composure, nay, asked a question or two concerning the preliminaries. He was told of the oath that would be administered, and how the words he spoke after taking that oath would be implicitly believed, and that he must be careful to say nothing that was not strictly true. The color, not an indignant blush, but a suffusion as of pleasure, mantled over his cheeks as this was explained. They arrived. They were conducted into some outer room to await the call of the peers. What tortures the boy felt as strangers came up, some to speak and others to gaze, all of indignation, resolution, grief, and more than manhood struggles that tore his bosom during the annoying delays that always protract this sort of scenes, none cared to scan. He was there unresisting, apparently composed. If now his cheek flushed, and now his lips withered into paleness, if now the sense of suffocation rose in his throat, and now tears rushed into his eyes, as the image of his sweet mother passed across his memory, none regarded, none cared. When I have thought of the spasms and throes which his tender and high-wrought soul endured during this interval, I often wonder his heartstrings did not crack, or his reason for ever unsettle. As it is, he has not yet escaped the influence of that hour. It shadows his life with eclipse. It comes whispering agony to him, when otherwise he might forget. Some author has described the effect of misfortune on the virtuous as the crushing of perfumes, so to force them to give forth their fragrance. Gerard is all nobleness, all virtue, all tenderness. Do we owe any part of his excellence to this hour of anguish? If so, I may be consoled, but I can never think of it without pain. He says himself, "Yes, without these sharp goadings, I had not devoted my whole life to clearing my mother's fame. Is this devotion a good? As yet no apparent benefit has sprung from it." At length he was addressed. "Young gentlemen, are you ready?" And he was led into that stately chamber, fit for solemn and high debate, thronged with the judges of his mother's cause. There was a dimness in his eye, a tumult in his heart that confused him, while on his appearance there was first a murmur, then a general hush. Each regarded him with compassion as they discerned the marks of suffering in his countenance. A few moments passed before he was addressed, and when it was supposed that he had had time to collect himself, the proper officer administered the oath, and then the barrister asked him some slight questions, not to startle, but to lead back his memory by insensible degrees to the necessary facts. The boy looked at him with scorn. He tried to be calm, to elevate his voice. Twice it faltered. The third time he spoke slowly but distinctly. "I have sworn to speak the truth, and I am to be believed. My mother is innocent." "But this is not the point, young gentleman," interrupted his interrogator. "I only asked if you remembered your father's house in Cumberland." The boy replied more loudly, but with broken accents. "I have said all I mean to say. You may murder me, but I will say no more. How dare you entice me into injuring my mother?" At the word, uncontrollable tears burst forth, pouring in torrents down his burning cheeks. He told me that he well remembers the feeling that rose to his tongue, instigating him to cry shame on all present. But his voice failed. His purpose was too mighty for his young heart. He sobbed and wept. The more he tried to control the impulse, the more hysterical the fit grew. He was taken from the bar, and the peers, moved by his distress, came to a resolve that they would dispense with his attendance and be satisfied by hearing his account of the transaction from those persons to whom he made it at the period when it occurred. I will now mention that the result of this judicial inquiry was a decree of divorce in Sir Boyvill's favour. Gerard, removed from the bar and carried home, recovered his composure, but he was silent, revolving the consequences which he expected would ensue from disobedience. His father had menaced to turn him out of doors, and he did not doubt but that this threat would be put into execution, so that he was somewhat surprised that he was taken home at all. Perhaps they meant to send him to a place of exile of their own choosing, perhaps to make the expulsion public and ignominious. The powers of grown-up people appear so illimitable in a child's eyes, who have no data whereby to discover the probable from the improbable. At length, the fear of confinement became paramount. He revolted from it. His notion was to go and seek his mother, and his mind was quickly made up to forestall their violence and to run away. He was ordered to confine himself to his own room. His food was brought to him. This looked like the confirmation of his fears. His heart swelled high. "They think to treat me like a child, but I will show myself independent. Wherever my mother is, she is better than they all. If she is imprisoned, I will free her, or I will remain with her. How glad she will be to see me. How happy shall we be again together. My father may have all the rest of the world to himself. When I am with my mother, in a cavern or a dungeon, I care not where." Night came on, he went to bed, he even slept, and awoke terrified to think that the opportune hour might be overpast. Daylight was dawning faintly in the east. The clocks of London struck 4. He was still in time. Everyone in the house slept. He rose and dressed. He had nearly 10 guineas of his own. This was all his possession. He had counted them the night before he opened the door of his chamber. Daylight was struggling with darkness, and all was very still. He stepped out. He descended the stairs. He got into the hall. Every accustomed object seemed new and strange at that early hour, and he looked with some dismay at the bars and bolts of the house door. He feared making a noise and rousing some servant. Still, the thing must be attempted. Slowly and cautiously he pushed back the bolts. He lifted up the chain. It fell from his hands with terrific clatter on the stone pavement. His heart was in his mouth. He did not fear punishment, but he feared ill success. He listened as well as his throbbing pulses permitted. All was still. The key of the door was in the lock. It turned easily at his touch, and in another moment the door was open. The fresh air blew upon his cheeks. The deserted street was before him. He closed the door after him, and with a sort of extra caution locked it on the outside, and then took to his heels, throwing the key down a neighboring street. When out of sight of his home, he walked more slowly, and began to think seriously of the course to pursue. To find his mother. All the world had been trying to find her, and had not succeeded, but he believed that by some means she would hear of his escape and come to him. But whither go in the first instance? His heart replied, to Cumberland, to Dramore. There he had lived with his mother. There had he lost her. He felt assured that in its neighborhood he should again be restored to her. Traveling had given him some idea of distance, and of the modes of getting from one place to another. He felt that it would be a task of too great difficulty to attempt walking across England. He had no carriage. He knew of no ship to take him. Some conveyance he must get, so he applied to a hackney coach. It was standing solitary in the middle of the street, the driver asleep on the steps, the skeleton horses hanging down their heads, with the peculiarly disconsolate look these poor hacked animals have. Gerard, as the son of a wealthy man, was accustomed to consider that he had a right to command those whom he could pay, yet fear of discovery and being sent back to his father filled him with unusual fears. He looked at the horses and the man. He advanced nearer, but he was afraid to take the decisive step, till the driver, awaking, started up and shook himself, stared at the boy, and seeing him well dressed, and he looked too older than his years from being tall, he asked, "Do you want me, sir?" "Yes," said Gerard, "I want you to drive me." "Get in then. Where are you going?" "I am going a long way, to Dramore, that is in Cumberland." The boy hesitated. It struck him that those miserable horses could not carry him far. "Then you want me to take you to the stage?" said the man. "It goes from Piccadilly at 5. We have no time to lose." Gerard got in on they jumbled, and arriving at the coach office, saw some half-dozen stages ready to start. The name of Liverpool on one struck the boy by the familiar name. If he could get to Liverpool, it were easy afterward even to walk to Dramore. So getting out of the hackney coach, he went up to the coachman, who was mounting his box, and asked, "Will you take me to Liverpool?" "Yes, my fine fellow, if you can pay the fare." "How much is it?" drawing out his purse. "Inside or outside?" From the moment he had addressed these men, and they began to talk of money, Gerard, calling to mind the vast disbursements of gold coin he had seen made by his father and the courier on their travels, began to fear that his little stock would ill suffice to carry him so far, and the first suggestion of prudence the little fellow ever experienced made him now answer, "Whichever costs least." "Outside, then." "Oh, I have that, I can pay you." "Jump up then, my lad, lend me your hand here by me, that's right, all's well, you're just in the nick, we are off directly." He cracked his whip, and away they flew, and as they went, Gerard felt free and going to his mother. Such, in these civilized times, are the facilities offered to the execution of our wildest wishes. The consequences, the moral consequences, are still the same, still require the same exertions to overcome them, but we have no longer to fight with physical impediments. If Gerard had begun his expedition from any other town, curiosity had perhaps been excited, but in the vast, busy metropolis, each one takes care of himself, and few scrutinize the motives or means of others. Perched up on the coach box, Gerard had a few questions to answer. Was he going home? Did he live in Liverpool? But the name of Dramore was a sufficing answer. The coachman had never heard of such a place, but it was a gentleman's seat, and it was Gerard's home, and that was enough. Some day you must ask Gerard to relate to you his adventures during this journey. They will come warmly and vividly from him, while mine, as a mere reflex, must be tame. It is his mind I would describe, and I will not pause to narrate the tantalizing cross-questioning that he underwent from a Scotchman, nor the heart-heavings with which he heard allusions made to the divorce case before the Lords. A newspaper describing his own conduct was in the hands of one of the passengers. He heard his mother lightly alluded to. He would have leaped from the coach, but that was to give up all. He pressed his hands to his ears. He scowled on those around. His heart was on fire. Yet he had one consolation. He was free. He was going to her. He resolved never to mingle with his fellow creatures more. Buried in some rural retreat with his mother, it mattered little what the vulgar and the indifferent said about either. Some qualms did assail him. Should he find his dear mother? Where was she? His childish imagination refused to paint her distant from Dramore. His own removal from that mansion so soon after losing her associated her indelibly with the mountains, the ravines, the brawling streams, and clustering woods of his natal county. She must be there. He would drive away the man of violence who took her from him, and they would be happy together. A day and a night brought him to Liverpool, and the coachman, hearing whither he wished to go, deposited him in the stage for Lancaster on his arrival. He went inside this time and slept all the way. At Lancaster, he was recognized by several persons, and they wondered to see him alone. He was annoyed at their recognition and questionings, and though it was night when he arrived, instantly set off to walk to Dramore. For 2 months from this time, he lived wandering from cottage to cottage, seeking his mother. The journey from Lancaster to Dramore he performed as speedily as he well could. He did not enter the house. That would be delivering himself up as a prisoner. By night he clambered the park railings and entered like a thief the domains where he had spent his childhood. Each path was known to him, and almost every tree. Here he sat with his mother. There they found the first violet of spring. His pilgrimage was achieved, but where was she? His heart beat as he reached the little gate whence they had issued on that fatal night. All the grounds bore marks of neglect and the master's absence, and the lock of this gate was spoiled. A sort of rough bolt had been substituted. Gerard pushed it back. The rank grass had gathered thick on the threshold, but it was the same spot. How well he remembered it. 2 years only had since passed. He was still a child, yet to his own fancy how much taller, how much more of a man he had become. Besides, he now fancied himself master of his own actions. He had escaped from his father, and he who had threatened to turn him out of doors would not seek to possess himself of him again. He belonged to no one, he was cared for by no one, by none but her whom he sought with firm, yet anxious expectation. There he had seen her last. He stepped forward. He followed the course of the lane. He came to where the road crossed it, where the carriage drove up, where she had been torn from him. It was daybreak, a June morning. All was golden and still. A few birds twittered, but the breeze was hushed, and he looked out on the extent of country commanded from the spot where he stood, and saw only nature, the rugged hills, the green cornfields, the flowery meads, and the umbrageous trees in deep repose. How different from the wild, tempestuous night, when she whom he sought was torn away. He could then see only a few yards before him. Now he could mark the devious windings of the road, and afar off, distinguish the hazy line of the ocean. He sat down to reflect. What was he to do? In what nook of the wide expanse was his mother hid? That some portion of the landscape he viewed harbored her was his fixed belief, a belief founded in inexperience and fancy, but not the less deep-rooted. He meditated for some time, and then walked forward. He remembered when he ran panting and screaming along that road. He was a mere child then, and what was he now? A boy of 11, yet he looked back with disdain to the endeavors of 2 years before. He walked along in the same direction that he had at that time pursued, and soon found that he reached the turnpike road to Lancaster. He turned off, and went by the crossroad that leads to the wild and dreary plains that form the coast. The inner range of picturesque hills, on the declivity of which Dramore is situated, is not more than 5 miles from the sea, but the shore itself is singularly blank and uninteresting, varied only by sandhills thrown up to the height of 30 or 40 feet, intersected by rivers, which at low water are fordable even on foot, but which, when the tide is up, are dangerous to those who do not know the right track, from the holes and ruts which render the bed of the river uneven. In winter, indeed, at the period of spring tides, or in stormy weather, with a west wind which drives the ocean towards the shore, the passage is often exceedingly dangerous, and except under the direction of an experienced guide, fatal accidents occur. Gerard reached the borders of the ocean near one of these streams. Behind him rose his native mountains, range above range, divided by tremendous gulfs, varied by the shadows of the clouds and the gleams of sunlight. Close to him was the waste seashore. The ebbing tide gave a dreary, sluggish appearance to the ocean, and the river, a shallow, rapid stream, emptied its slender pittance of mountain water noiselessly into the lazy deep. It was a scene of singular desolation. On the other side of the river, not far from the mouth, was a rude hut, unroofed, and fallen to decay, erected perhaps as the abode of a guide. Near it grew a stunted tree, withered, moss-covered, spectre-like. The sandhills lay scattered around, the seagulls screamed above and skimmed over the waste. Gerard sat down and wept, motherless, escaped from his angry father. Even to his young imagination, his fate seemed as drear and gloomy as the scene around. Chapter 20. I do not know why I have dwelt on these circumstances so long. Let me hasten to finish. For 2 months Gerard wandered in the neighborhood of Dramore. If he saw a lone cottage, embowered in trees, hidden in some green recess of the hills, sequestered and peaceful, he thought, perhaps my mother is there. And he clambered towards it, finding it at last, probably, a mere shepherd's hut, poverty-stricken and tenanted by a noisy family. His money was exhausted. He made a journey to Lancaster to sell his watch, and then returned to Cumberland. His clothes, his shoes were worn out. Often he slept in the open air. Used milk, cheese, and black bread were his fare. His hope was to find his mother, his fear to fall again into his father's hands. But as the first sentiment failed, his friendless condition grew more sad. He began to feel that he was indeed a feeble, helpless boy, abandoned by all. He thought nothing was left for him but to lie down and die. Meanwhile he was noticed, and at last recognized, by some of the tenants, and information reached his father of where he was. Unfortunately, the circumstance of his disappearance became public. It was put into the newspapers as a mysterious occurrence, and the proud Sir Boyville found himself not only pitied on account of his wife's conduct, but suspected of cruelty towards his only child. At first he was himself frightened and miserable, but when he heard where Gerard was and that he could be recovered at any time, these softer feelings were replaced by fury. He sent the tutor to possess himself of his son's person. He was seized with the help of a constable, treated more like a criminal than an unfortunate, erring child, carried back to Buckinghamshire, shut up in a barricaded room, debarred from air and exercise, lectured, menaced, treated with indignity. The boy, hitherto accustomed to more than usual indulgence and freedom, was at first astonished and then wildly indignant at the treatment he suffered. He was told that he should not be set free till he submitted. He believed that to mean until he could give testimony against his mother. He resolved rather to die. Several times he endeavored to escape and was brought back and treated with fresh barbarity, his hands bound, and stripes inflicted by menials, till driven to despair, he at one time determined to starve himself, and at another tried to bribe a servant to bring him poison. The trusting piety inculcated by his gentle mother was destroyed by the ill-judged cruelty of his father and his doltish substitute. It is painful to dwell on such circumstances, to think of a sensitive, helpless child treated with the brutality exercised towards a galley slave. Under this restraint, Gerard grew such as you saw him at Baden, sullen, ferocious, plunged in melancholy, delivered up to despair. It was some time before he discovered that the submission demanded of him was not to run away again. On learning this, he wrote to his father. He spoke with horror of the personal indignities he had endured, of his imprisonment, of the conduct of Mr. Carter. He did not mean it as such, but his letter grew into an affecting, irresistible appeal that even moved Sir Boyville. His stupid pride prevented him from showing the regret he felt. He still used the language of reproof and conditional pardon, but the tutor was dismissed, and Gerard restored to liberty. Had his father been generous, or just enough to show his regret, he might probably have obliterated the effects of his harshness. As it was, Gerard gave no thanks for a boon which saved his life, but restored him to none of its social blessings. He was still friendless, still orphaned in his affections, still the memory of intolerable tyranny, the recurrence of which was threatened if he made an ill use of the freedom accorded him, clung like the shirt of Nessus, and his noble, ardent nature was lacerated by the intolerable recollection of slavish terrors. I saw him at Baden, and it was at Baden that I also first knew him. You had left the baths when my mother and I arrived. We became acquainted with Sir Boyville. He was still handsome, he was rich, and those qualities of mind which ill agreed with Elizabeth's finer nature did not displease a fashionable woman of the world. Such was my mother. Something that was called an attachment sprang up, and they married. She preferred the situation of wife to that of widow, and he, having been accustomed to the social comforts of a domestic circle, despite his disasters, disliked his bachelor state. They married, and I, just then 18, just out, as it is called, became the sister of my beloved Gerard. I feel pride when I think of the services that I have rendered him. He had another fall from his horse not long after, or rather, again urging the animal down a precipice, it fell. He was underneath, and his leg was broken. During the long confinement that ensued, I was his faithful nurse and companion. Naturally lively, yet I could sympathize in his sorrows. By degrees I won his confidence. He told me all his story, all his feelings. He grew mild and soft under my influence. He grew to regret that he had been vanquished by adversity so as to become almost what he was accused of being, a frantic idiot. As he talked of his mother and the care she bestowed on his early years, he wept to think how unlike he was to the creature she had wished him to become. A desire to reform, to repair past faults, to school himself, grew out of such talk. He threw off his sullenness and gloom. He became studious at the same time that he grew gentle. His education, which had proceeded but badly while he refused to lend his mind to improvement, was now the object of his own thoughts and exertions. Instead of careering wildly over the hills, or being thrown under some tree delivered up to miserable reverie, he asked for masters, and was continually seen with a book in his hands. The passion of his soul still subsisted, modulated by his new feelings. He continued to believe in the innocence of his mother, though he often doubted her existence. He longed inexpressibly to unveil the mystery that shrouded her fate. He devoted himself in his heart to discovering the truth. He resolved to occupy his whole life in the dear task of reinstating her in that cloudless purity of reputation, which he intimately felt she had never deserved to forfeit. He considered the promise exacted from him by his father as preventing him from following up his design, and as binding him till he was 21. Till then, he deferred his endeavors. No young spendthrift ever aspired for the attainment of the age of freedom and the possession of an estate as vehemently as did Gerard for the hour which was to permit him to deliver himself wholly up to this task. Before that time arrived I married. I wished to take him abroad with us, but the unfounded, as I believe, notion that the secret of his mother's fate is linked to the English shores made him dislike to leave his native country. It was only on our return that he consented to come as far as Marseille to meet us. When he had reached the age of 21, he announced to his father his resolve to discover his mother's fate. Sir Boyvill was highly indignant. The only circumstance that at all mitigated the disgrace of his wife's flight was the oblivion into which she and all concerning her had sunk. To have new inquiries set on foot, and the forgotten shame recalled to the memories of men, appeared not less wicked than insane. He remonstrated, he grew angry, he stormed, he forbade, but Gerard considered that time had set a limit to his authority, and only withdrew in silence, not the less determined to pursue his own course. I need not say that he met with no success. A mystery so impenetrable at first does not acquire clearness after time has obscured the little ever known. Whatever were the real circumstances and feelings that occasioned her flight, however innocent she might then be, time has cemented his mother's union with another and made her forget those she left behind. Or may I not say, what I am inclined to believe, that though the violence of another was the cause at last of guilt in her, yet she pined for those she deserted, that her heart was soon broken, that the sod has long since covered her form, while the miserable man who caused all this evil is but too eager to observe a silence which prevents his name from being loaded with the execrations he deserves. I cannot help, therefore, regretting that Gerard insists upon discovering the obscure grave of his miserable mother, while he, who, whether living or dead, believes her to have been always innocent, is to be dissuaded by no arguments, still less by the angry denunciations of Sir Boyvill, whose conduct throughout he looks on as being the primal cause of his mother's misfortunes. I have told you the tale, as nearly as I can, in the spirit in which Gerard himself would have communicated it. Such was my tacit pledge to him, nor do I wish, by my suspicions or conjectures, to deprive him of your sympathy and the belief he wishes you to entertain of his mother's innocence. But truth will force its way, and who can think her wholly guiltless? Would to God! Oh, how often and how fervently have I prayed that Gerard were cured of the madness which renders his life a wild, unprofitable dream, and looking soberly on the past, consent to bury in oblivion misfortunes and errors which are beyond all cure, and which it is worse than vain to remember. Chapter 21. There was to Elizabeth a fascinating interest in the story related by Lady Cecil. Elizabeth had no wild, fairy-like imagination. Her talents, which were remarkable, her serious, thoughtful mind, was warmed by the vital heat emanating from her affections. Whatever regarded these moved her deeply. Here was a tale full of human interest, of love, error, of filial tenderness, and deep-rooted, uneradicable fidelity. Elizabeth, who knew little of life, except through such experience as she gathered from the emotions of her own heart and the struggling passions of Falkner, could not regard the story in the same worldly light as Lady Cecil. There was an unfathomable mystery, but was there guilt as far as regarded Mrs. Neville? Elizabeth could not believe it. She believed that in a nature as finely formed as hers was described to have been, maternal love, and love for such a child as Gerard, must have risen paramount to every other feeling. Philosophers have said that the most exalted natures are endowed with the strongest and deepest-seated passions. It is by combating and purifying them that the human being rises into excellence, and the combat is assisted by setting the good in opposition to the evil. Perhaps Mrs. Neville had loved, though even that seemed strange, but her devoted affection to her child must have been more powerful than a love which, did it exist, appeared unaccompanied by one sanctifying or extenuating circumstance. Thus thought Elizabeth, Gerard appeared in a beautiful and heroic light, bent on his holy mission of redeeming his mother's name from the stigma accumulated on it. Her heart warmed within her at the thought that such a task assimilated to hers. She was endeavoring to reconcile her benefactor to life and to remove from his existence the stings of unavailing remorse. She tried to fancy that some secret tie existed between their two distinct tasks, and that a united happy end would spring up for both. After musing for some time in silence, at length she said, "But you do not tell me whither Mr. Neville is now gone, and what it is that has so newly awakened his hopes." "You remind me," replied Lady Cecil, "of what I had nearly forgotten. It is a provoking and painful circumstance, the artifice of cupidity to dupe enthusiasm. You must know that Gerard, in furtherance of his wild project, has left an intimation among the cottages and villages near Dramore, and in Lancaster itself, that he will give £200 to anyone who shall bring any information that will conduce to the discovery of Mrs. Neville's fate. This is a large bribe to falsehood, and yet, until now, no one has pretended to have anything to tell. But the other day he received a letter, and the person who wrote it was so earnest that he sent a duplicate to Sir Boyville. This letter stated that the writer, Gregory Hoskins, believed himself to be in possession of some facts connected with Mrs. Neville of Dramore, and on the £200 being properly secured to him by a written bond, he would communicate them. This letter was dated Lancaster, thither Gerard is gone. "Does it speak of Mrs. Neville as still alive?" asked Elizabeth. "It says barely the words which I have repeated," Lady Cecil replied. "Sir Boyville, knowing his son's impetuosity, hurried down here to stop, if he could, his reviving through such means the recollection of his unfortunate lady. With what success you have seen. Gerard is gone, nor can anyone guess what tale will be trumped up to deceive and rob him." Elizabeth could not feel as secure as her friend that nothing would come of the promised information. This was not strange. Besides, the different view taken by a worldly and an experienced person, the tale with all its mystery was an old one to Lady Cecil, while to her friend it bore the freshness of novelty. To the one, it was a story of the dead and the forgotten. To the other, it was replete with living interest. The enthusiasm of Gerard communicated itself to her, and she felt that his present journey was full of event, the first step in a discovery of all that hitherto had been inscrutable. A few days brought a letter from Gerard. Lady Cecil read it, and then gave it to her young friend to peruse. It was dated Lancaster. It said, "My journey has hitherto been fruitless. This man Hoskins has gone from Lancaster, leaving word that I should find him in London, but in so negligent a way as to lower my hopes considerably. His chief aim must be to earn the promised reward, and I feel sure that he would take more pains to obtain it, did he think that it was really within his grasp. He arrived but a few weeks since, it seems, from America, whither he migrated some 20 years ago from Ravinglas. How can he bring news of her I seek from across the Atlantic? The very idea fills me with disturbance. Has he seen her? Great God, does she yet live? Did she commission him to make inquiries concerning her abandoned child? No, Sophia, my life on it, it is not so, she is dead. My heart too truly reveals the sad truth to me. Can I then wish to hear that she is no more? My dear, dear mother, were all the accusations true which are brought against you, still would I seek your retreat, endeavor to assuage your sorrows. Whatever you are of more worth to me. Methinks that you must still be more worthy of affection than all else that the earth contains. But it is not so. I feel it, I know it, she is dead. Yet when, where, how, oh my father's vain commands, I would walk barefoot to the summit of the Andes to have these questions answered. The interval that must elapse before I reach London and see this man is hard to bear. What will he tell? Nothing. Often, in my lucid intervals, as my father would call them, in my hours of despondency, I fear nothing. You have not played me false, dearest Sophie. In telling your lovely friend the strange story of my woes, you have taught her to mourn my mother's fate, not to suspect her goodness. I am half angry with myself for devolving the task upon you, for despite your kind endeavors, I read your heart, my worldly wise sister, and know its unbelief. I forgive you, for you never saw my mother's face, nor heard her voice. Had you ever beheld the purity and integrity that sat upon her brow, and listened to her sweet tones, she would visit your dreams by day and night, as she does mine, in the guise of an angel robed in perfect innocence. I cannot forgive my father for his accusations. His own heart must be bad, or he could not credit that any evil inhabited hers. For how many years that guileless heart was laid bare to him, and if it was not so fond and admiring towards himself as he could have wished, still there was no concealment, no tortuosity. He saw it all, though now he discredits the evidence of his senses, shuts his eyes, and hooting at the glorious sun in heaven, cries out, "Where is it?" For truth was her attribute, the open heart, which made the brow, the eyes, the cheerful mien, the sweet, loving smile and thrilling voice, all transcripts of its pure emotions. It was this that rendered her the adorable being, which all who knew her acknowledged that she was. I am solicitous beyond measure that Miss Falkner should receive no false impression. Her image is before me when I saw her first, pale in the agony of fear, bending over her dying father. By day and by night she forgot herself to attend on him. She who loves a parent so well can understand me better than any other. She, I am convinced, will form a true judgment. She will approve my perseverance and share my doubts and fears. Will she not? Ask her, or am I too vain, too credulous? Is there in the whole world one creature who will join with me in my faith and my labors? You do not, Sophia, that I have long known, and the feeling of disappointment is already blunted. But it will revive, it will be barbed with a new sting, if I am deceived in my belief that Elizabeth Falkner shares my convictions and appreciates the utility, the necessity of my endeavors. I do not desire her pity that you give me, but at this moment I am blessed by the hope that she feels with me. I cannot tell you the good this idea does me. It spurs me to double energy in my pursuit, and it sustains me during the uncertainty that attends it. It makes me inexpressibly more anxious to clear my mother's name in her eyes, since she deigns to partake my griefs. I desire that she should hereafter share in the triumph of my success. My success, the word throws me 10,000 fathoms deep, from the thoughts of innocence and goodness to those of wrongs, death, or living misery. Farewell, dearest Sophia. This letter is written at night. Tomorrow early I set out by a fast coach to London. I shall write again, or you will see me soon. Keep Miss Falkner with you till I return, and write me a few words of encouragement. Not a line in this letter, but interested and gratified Elizabeth, and Lady Cecil saw the blush of pleasure mantle over her speaking countenance. She was half glad, half sorry. She looked on Elizabeth as she who could cure Gerard of his quixotic devotion, by inspiring him with feelings which, while they had all the enthusiasm natural to his disposition, would detach him from his vain endeavors, and center his views and happiness in the living instead of the dead. Lady Cecil knew that Gerard already loved her friend. He had never loved before, and the tenderness of his manner, and the admiration that lighted up his eyes whenever he looked on her, revealed the birth of passion. Elizabeth, less quick to feel, or at least more tranquil in the display of feeling, yet sympathized too warmly with him, felt too deeply interested in all he said and did, not to betray that she was touched by the divine fire that smooths the ruggedness of life, and fills with peace and smiles a darkling, stormy world. But instead of weaning Gerard from his madness, she encouraged him in it, as she well knew, for when she wrote to Gerard, she asked Elizabeth to add a few lines, and thus she wrote. I thank you for the confidence you repose in me, and more than that, I must express how deeply I feel for you, the more that I think that justice and truth are on your side. Whether you succeed or not, I confess that I think you are right in your endeavors. Your aim is a noble and a sacred one, and like you, I cherish the hope that it will end in the exculpation of one deeply injured, and your being rewarded for your fidelity to her memory. God bless you with all the happiness you deserve. No subsequent letter arrived from Gerard. Lady Cecil wondered and conjectured and expected impatiently. She and her friend could talk of nothing else. The strange fact that a traveler from America proclaimed that he had tidings of the lost one offered a fertile field for suppositions. Had Mrs. Neville been carried across the Atlantic? How impossible was this, against her own consent? No pirate's bark was there, with a crew experienced in crime, ready to acquiesce in a deed of violence. No fortalice existed in whose impenetrable walls she could have been immured, yet so much of strange and fearful must belong to her fate, which the imagination mourned to think of. Love, though in these days it carries on its tragedies more covertly, and kills by the slow, untold pang, by the worm in the bosom, and exerts its influence rather by teaching deceit than instigating to acts of violence. Yet love reigns in the hearts of men as tyrannically and fiercely, and causes as much evil, as much ruin, and as many tears, as when, in the younger world, hecatombs were slain in his honor. In former days mortals wasted rather life than feeling, and every blow was a physical one. Now the heart dies, though the body lives, and a miserable existence is dragged out, after hope and joy have ceased to adorn it. Yet love is still, despite the schoolmaster and the legislator, the prime law of human life, and ally the Neville was well fitted to inspire an ardent passion. She had a sensibility which, while it gave strength to her affections, yet diffused a certain weakness over the mechanism of her being that made those around her tremble. She had genius which added luster to her eye and shed around her a fascination of manner, which no man could witness without desiring to dedicate himself to her service. She seemed the very object whom Sheridan addressed when he said, "For friends in every age you'll meet, and lovers in the young." That she should be loved to desperation could excite no wonder, but what had been the effects of this love? A distant home across the ocean, a home of privation and sorrow, the yearning for her lost children, the slow breaking of the contrite heart, a life dragged on despite the pangs of memory, or a nameless grave. Such were the conjectures caused by the letter of the American. At length Neville returned. Each turned her eye on his face to read the intelligence he had acquired in his speaking countenance. It was sad. She lives and is lost, thought Lady Cecil. He mourns her dead, was the supposition of the single-minded Elizabeth. At first he avoided the subject of his inquiry, and his companions did not question him, till at last he suddenly exclaimed, "Do you not wish to learn something, Sophia? Have you forgotten the object of my journey?" "Dear Gerard," replied Lady Cecil, "these walls and woods, had they a voice, could tell you that we have thought and spoken of nothing else." "She is dead," he answered abruptly. A start and exclamation was the reply. He continued, "If there be any truth in the tale I have heard, my dear, injured mother is dead. That is, if what I have heard concern her, mean anything, or is not a mere fabrication. You shall hear all by and by. I will relate all I have been told. It is a sad story if it be hers, if it be a true story at all." These disjointed expressions raised the curiosity and interest of his auditors to their height. It was evening. Instead of going on with his account, he passed into the adjoining room, opened the glass door, and stepped out into the open air. It was dark, scarcely could you see the dim outline of the woods, yet far on the horizon where sky and sea met, there was a streak of light. Sophia and Elizabeth followed to the room whence he had gone, and drew their chairs near the open window and pressed each other's hands. "What can it all mean?" at length said Lady Cecil. "Hush," whispered Elizabeth. "He is here. I saw him cross the streak of light." "True," said Gerard's voice. His person they could not distinguish, for they were in darkness. "I am here, and I will tell you now all I have heard. I will sit at your feet. Give me your hand, Sophie, that I may feel that you are really present. It is too dark to see anything." He did not ask for Elizabeth's hand, but he took it, and placing it on Lady Cecil's, gently clasped both. "I cannot see either of you, but indulge my wayward humor. So much of course and commonplace has been thrown on the most sacred subject in the world that I want to bathe my soul in darkness, a darkness as profound as that which wraps my mother's fate. Now for my story." Chapter 22. You know that I did not find this man, this Hoskins, at Lancaster. By his direction I sought him in London, and after some trouble found him. He was busy in his own affairs, and it was difficult to get at him, but by perseverance, and asking him to dine with me at a coffee house, I at last succeeded. He is a native of Ravinglas, a miserable town on the seashore of Cumberland, with which I am well acquainted, for it is not far from Dromore. He emigrated to America before I was born, and after various speculations, is at last settled at Boston in some sort of trade, the exigencies of which brought him over here, and he seized the opportunity to visit his family. There they were, still inhabiting the forlorn town of Ravinglas, their cottage still looking out on a dreary extent of sand, mud, and marsh, and the far mountains which would seem to invite the miserable dwellers of the flats to shelter themselves in their green recesses, but they invite in vain. Hoskins found his mother, a woman nearly 100 years of age, alive, and a widowed sister living with her, surrounded by a dozen children of all ages. He passed 2 days with them and naturally recurred to the changes that had taken place in the neighborhood. He had at one time had dealings with the steward of Dramore and had seen my father. When he emigrated, Sir Boyville had just married. Hoskins asked how it went on with him and his bride. It is our glorious fate to be in the mouths of the vulgar, so he heard the story of my mother's mysterious flight. And in addition to this, he was told of my boyish wanderings, my search for my mother, and my declaration that I would give £200 to anyone through whose means I should discover her fate. The words fell at first upon a heedless ear, but the next morning it all at once struck him that he might gain the reward, and he wrote to me, and as I was described as a wanderer without a home, he wrote also to my father. When I saw him in town, he seemed ashamed of the trouble I had taken. "It is I who am to get the £200, he said, "not you. The chance was worth wasting a little breath, but you may not think the little I have to tell worth your long journey." At length I brought him to the point. At one period, a good many years ago, he was a settler in New York, and by some chance he fell in with a man lately arrived from England, who asked his advice as to obtaining employment. He had some little money, some few £100s, but he did not wish to sink it in trade or the purchase of land, but to get some situation with a tolerable salary and keep his little capital at command. A strange way of using money and time in America, but such was the fancy of the stranger. He said he should not be easy unless he could draw out his money at any time and emigrate at an hour's notice. This man's name was Osborne. He was shrewd, ready-witted, and good-natured, but idle and even unprincipled. "He did me a good turn once," said Hoskins, "which makes me unwilling to do him a bad one, but you cannot injure him, I think, in America. He has risen in the world since the time I mention, and has an employment under our minister at Mexico." After all, he did not tell me much, and what I learned came out in long talks by degrees. During a journey or two we took together to the West. He had been a traveler, a soldier in the East Indies, and unlucky everywhere, and it had gone hard with him at one time in Bengal, but for the kindness of a friend. He was a gentleman far above him in station who got him out of trouble and paid his passage to England, and afterward, when this gentleman returned himself to the island, he found Osborne in trouble again, and again he assisted him. In short, sir, it came out that if this gentleman, Osborne would never tell his name, stood his friend, it was not for nothing this time. There was a lady to be carried off. Osborne swore he did not know who, he thought it a runaway match, but it turned out something worse, for never did girl take on so for leaving her home with a lover. I tell the story badly, for I never got the rights of it. It ended tragically. The lady died, was drowned, as well as I could make out, in some river. You know how dangerous the streams are on our coast. It was the naming Cumberland and our estuaries that set me asking questions, which frightened Osborne. When he found that I was a native of that part of the world, he grew as mute as a fish, and never a word more of lady or friend did I get from him, except, as I guessed, he was well rewarded and sent over the water out of the way, and he swore he believed that the gentleman was dead too. It was no murder, that he averred, but a sad tragic accident that might look like one, and he grew as white as a sheet if ever I tried to bring him to speak of it again. It haunted his thoughts nevertheless, and he would talk in his sleep and dream of being hanged and mutter about a grave dug in the sands and there being no parson, and the dark breakers of the ocean and horses scampering away and the lady's wet hair, nothing regular, but such as often made me waken him, for in wild nights such mutterings were no lullaby. Now, sir, whether the lady he spoke of were your lady mother is more than I can say, but the time and place tally. It is 12 years this summer since he came out, and it had just happened, for his heart and head were full of horrors, and he feared every vessel from Europe brought out a warrant to arrest him, or the like. He was a chicken-hearted fellow, and I have known him hide himself for a week when a packet came from Liverpool. But he got courage as time went on. When I saw him last, he had forgotten all about it, and when I jeered him about his terrors, he laughed and said all was well, and he should not care going to England, for that the story was blown over, and neither he nor his friend even so much as suspected. This, sir, is my story, and I don't think he ever told me any more, or that I can remember anything else. But such as I tell it, I can swear to it. There was a lady run off with, and she died, by fair means or foul, before she quitted the coast, and was buried, as we might bury in the far west, without bell or prayer book. And Osborne does not know the name of the lady, but the gentleman he knew, though he has never since heard of him, and believes him to be dead. You best know whether my story is worth the £200. Such, Sophia, is the tale I heard. Such is the coarse hand and vulgar tongue that first touches the veil that conceals my mother's fate. It is a strange story, said Lady Cecil, shuddering. But on my life, a true one, cried Neville, as I will prove. Osborne is now at Mexico. I have inquired at the American consuls. He is expected back to Washington at the end of this summer. In a few weeks I shall embark and see this man, who now bears a creditable character, and learn if there is any foundation for Hoskins's conjectures. If there is, and can I doubt it, if my mother died as he says, I shall learn the manner of her death, and who is the murderer. Murderer, echoed both his auditors. Yes, I cannot retract the word. Murderer in effect, if not in deed. Remember, I witnessed the act of violence which tore my mother from me. He who carried her away is, in all justice, an assassin, even if his hands be not imbrued with blood. Blood, did I say? Nay, none was shed. I know the spot, I have viewed the very scene. Our waste and desolate coast, the perilous, deceitful rivers, in one of which she perished, the very night, so tempestuous, the wild west wind bearing the tide with irresistible impetuosity up the estuaries, he seeking the solitary sands, perhaps some smuggling vessel lying in wait to carry her off unseen, unheard. To me it is as if I knew each act of the tragedy and heard her last sigh beneath the waves breathed for me. She was dragged out by these men, buried without friend, without decent rites. Her tomb the evil report her enemy raised above her, her grave the sands of that dreary shore. Oh, what wild, what miserable thoughts are these! This tale, instead of alleviating my anxious doubts, has taken the sleep out from my eyes. Images of death are forever passing before me. I think of the murderer with a heart that pants for revenge, and of my beloved mother with such pity, such religious woe, that I would spend my life on that shore seeking her remains, so that at last I might shed my tears above them and bear them to a more sacred spot. There is an easier way to gain both ends. It is a sad, but a wild and uncertain story, remarked Lady Cecil, and not sufficiently plain, I think, to take you away from us all across the Atlantic. A far slighter clue would take me so far, replied Gerard, as you well know. It is not for a traveller to Egypt to measure miles with such timidity. My dear Sophie, you would indeed think me mad if, after devoting my life to one pursuit, I were now to permit a voyage across the Atlantic to stand between me and the slightest chance of having my doubts cleared up. It is a voyage which thousands take every week for their interest or their pleasure. I do much, I think, in postponing my journey till this man returns to Washington. At first I had thought of taking my passage on the instant and meeting him on his journey homeward from Mexico, but I might miss him. Yet I long to be on the spot in America, for if anything should happen to him, if he should die and his secret die with him, how forever after I should be stung by self-reproach. But there seems to me so little foundation, Lady Cecil began. Neville made an impatient gesture, exclaiming, Are you not unreasonable, Sophie? My father has made a complete convert of you. Elizabeth interposed and asked, You saw this man more than once? Who, Hoskins? Yes, 3 times, and he always told the same story. He persisted in the main points, that the scene of the carrying off of the lady was his native shore, the coast of Cumberland, that the act immediately preceded Osborne's arrival in America 12 years ago, and that she died miserably, the victim of her wretched lover. He knew Osborne immediately on his coming to New York, when he was still suffering from the panic of such a tragedy, dreading the arrival of every vessel from England. At that time he concealed carefully from his new friend what he afterward, in the overflow of his heart, communicated so freely, and in after times he reminded him how, when an emissary of the police came from London to seek after some fraudulent defaulter, he, only hearing vaguely that there was search made for a criminal, hid himself for several days, that Osborne was privy to, was participator in a frightful tragedy, which to my eyes bears the aspect of murder, seems certain. I cannot doubt that my mother died then and there. How? The blood curdles to ask, but I would compass the earth to learn, to vindicate her name, to avenge her death. Elizabeth felt Gerard's hand tremble and grow cold. He rose and led the way into the drawing-room, while Lady Cecil whispered to her friend, "I am so very, very sorry to go to America on such a story as this, a story which, if it bear any semblance to the truth, had better be forever buried in oblivion. Dear Elizabeth, dissuade him, I entreat you." "Do you think Mr. Neville so easy of persuasion, or that he ought to be?" replied her companion. "Certainly, all that he has heard is vague, coming, as it does, from a third and an interested person. But his whole life has been devoted to the exculpation of his mother. And if he believes that this tale affords a clue to lead to discovery, he is a son, and the nature that stirs within him may gift him with a clearer vision and a truer instinct than we can pretend to. Who can say but that a mysterious yet powerful hand is at last held out to guide him to the completion of his task? Oh, dear Lady Cecil, there are secrets in the moral, sentient world of which we know nothing, such as brought Hamlet's father before his eyes, such as now may be stirring in your brother's heart, revealing to him the truth, almost without his own knowledge." "You are as mad as he," said Lady Cecil peevishly. "I thought you a calm and reasonable being, who would cooperate with me in weaning Gerard from his wild fancies, and in reconciling him to the world as it is. But you indulge in metaphysical sallies and sublime flights, which my commonplace mind can only regard as a sort of intellectual will-o'-the-wisp. You betray instead of assisting me. Peace be with Mrs. Neville, whether in her grave, or, in some obscure retreat, she grieves over the follies of her youth. She has been mourned for, as never mother was mourned before. But be reasonable, dear Elizabeth, and aid me in putting a stop to Gerard's insane career. You can, if you will. He reveres you, he would listen to you. Do not talk of mysterious hands and Hamlet's ghost, and all that is to carry us away to fairyland, but of the rational duties of life and the proper aim of a man to be useful to the living, and not spend the best years of his life in dreams of the dead." "What can I say?" replied Elizabeth. "You will be angry, but I sympathize with Mr. Neville, and I cannot help saying, though you scoff at me, that I think that in all he is doing, he is obeying the most sacred law of our nature, exculpating the innocent, and rendering duty to her who has a right, living or dead, to demand all his love." "Well," said Lady Cecil, "I have managed very ill. I had meant to make you my ally and have failed. I do not oppose Gerard in Sir Boyville's open, angry manner, but it has been my endeavor throughout to mitigate his zeal, and to change him from a wild sort of visionary into a man of this world. He has talents, he is the heir to large possessions, his father would gladly assist any rational pursuit. He might make a figure in his country, he might be anything he pleased, and instead of this, all is wasted on the unhappy dead. You do wrong to encourage him. Think of what I say, and use your influence in a more beneficial manner." During the following days, this sort of argument was several times renewed. Lady Cecil, who had heretofore opposed Neville covertly, with some show of sympathy, the fallacy of which he easily detected, and who had striven rather to lead him to forget than to argue against his views, now openly opposed his voyage to America. Gerard heard in silence. He would not reply. Nothing she said carried the slightest weight with him, and he had long been accustomed to opposition, and to take his own way in spite of it. He was satisfied to do so now, without making an effort to convince her. Yet he was hurt, and turned gladly to Elizabeth for consolation. Her avowed and warm approval, her anxious sympathy, the certainty she expressed that in the end he would succeed, and that his enthusiasm and zeal were implanted in his heart for the express purpose of his mother's vindication, and that he would fail in every higher duty if he now held back. All this echoed so faithfully his own thoughts, that she already appeared a portion of his existence that he could never part from, the dear and promised reward of all his exertions. In the ardor of her sympathy, Elizabeth wrote to Falkner. She had before written to tell him that she had seen again her friend of Marseille. She wrote trembling, fearful of being recalled home, for she remembered the mysterious shrinking of her father from the name of Neville. His replies, however, only spoke of a short journey he was making and a delay in his own joining her. Now again she wrote to speak of Neville's filial piety, his mother's death, her alleged dishonor, his sufferings and heroism. She dilated on this subject with fond approval and expressed her wishes for his success in warm and eager terms. For many days she had no reply. A letter came at last. It was short. It besought her instantly to return. "This is the last act of duty, of affection I shall ever ask," Falkner wrote. "Comply without demurring, come at once. Come, and hear the fatal secret that will divide us forever. Come, I ask but for a day. The eternal future you will, pass with your new friends." Had the writing not been firm and clear, such words had seemed to portend her benefactor's death. Wondering, struck by fear, inexpressibly anxious to comply with his wishes, pale and trembling, she besought Lady Cecil to arrange for her instant return. Gerard heard with sorrow, but without surprise. He knew, if her father demanded her presence, her first act would be obedience. But he grieved to see her suffer, and he began also to wonder by what strange coincidence they should both be doomed to sorrow through the disasters of their parents. Chapter 23. Falkner had parted with his dear adopted child under a strong excitement of fear concerning her health. The change of air and scene restored her so speedily that his anxieties were of short duration. He was, however, in no hurry to rejoin her, as he was taught to consider a temporary separation from him as important to her convalescence. For the first time after many years, Falkner was alone. True, he was so in Greece, but there he had an object. In Greece, also, it is true that he had dwelt on the past, writing even a narrative of his actions, and that remorse sat heavy at his heart while he pursued this task. Yet he went to Greece to assist in a glorious cause, and to redeem his name from the obloquy his confession would throw on it by his gallantry and death. There was something animating in these reflections. Then also disease had not attacked him, nor pain made him its prey. His sensations were healthful, and if his reflections were melancholy and self-condemning, yet they were attended by grandeur, and even by sublimity, the result of the danger that surrounded him and the courage with which he met it. Now he was left alone, broken in health, dashed in spirit, consenting to live, wishing to live for Elizabeth's sake, yet haunted still by one pale ghost, and the knowledge that his bosom contained a secret which, if divulged, would acquire for him universal detestation. He did not fear discovery, but little do they know, the human heart, who are not aware of the throes of shame and anguish that attend the knowledge that we are in reality a cheat, that we disguise our own real selves, and that truth is our worst enemy. Left to himself, Falkner thought of these things with bitterness. He loathed the burden that sat upon his soul. He longed to cast it off. Yet when he thought of Elizabeth, her devoted affection and earnest entreaties, he was again a coward. How could he consent to give her up and plant a dagger in her heart? There was but one cure to the irritation that his spirit endured, which was to take refuge in her society, and he was about to join her when a letter came, speaking of Gerard Neville, the same wild boy they had seen at Baden, the kind friend of Marseille, still melancholy, still stricken by adversity, but endowed with 1,000 qualities to attract love and admiration, full of sentiment and poetry, kind and tender as woman, resolute and independent as a man. Elizabeth said little, remembering Falkner's previous restriction upon his name, but she considered it her duty to mention him to her benefactor, and that being her duty to him, it became another to her new friend to assert his excellence, lest by some chance Falkner had mistaken and attributed qualities that did not belong to him. Falkner's thoughts became busy on this with new ideas. It was at once pleasing and painful to hear of the virtues of Gerard Neville. The pleasure was derived from the better portion of human nature, the pain from the worst, a lurking envy and dislike to excellence derived in any degree from one he hated, and with such sentiment he regarded the father of Gerard. Still he was the son of the angel he worshipped and had destroyed. She had loved her child to adoration, and to know that he grew up, all she would have wished would console her wandering, unappeased spirit. He remembered his likeness to her, and that softened him even more. Yet he thought of the past and what he had done, and the very idea of her son lamenting forever his lost mother filled him with renewed and racking remorse. That Elizabeth should now for the third time be thrown in his way was strange, and his first impulse was to recall her. It was well that Gerard should be noble-minded, endowed with talent, a rare and exalted being, but that she should be brought into near contact with him was evil. Between Falkner and Gerard Neville there existed a gulf unfathomable, horrific, deadly, and any friendship between him and his adopted child must cause disunion between her and Falkner. He had suffered much, but this last blow, a cause for disuniting them, would tax his fortitude too much. Yet thus it was to be taxed. He received a letter from Lady Cecil, of which Elizabeth was ignorant. Its ostensible object was to give good tidings of her fair guest's health and to renew her invitation to him, but there was a covert meaning which Falkner detected. Lady Cecil, though too young to be an inveterate matchmaker, yet conceived and cherished the idea of the marriage of Neville and Elizabeth. In common parlance, Gerard might look higher, but so also might Elizabeth, apparently the only daughter and heiress of a man of good birth and easy fortune. But this went for little with Lady Cecil. Gerard's peculiar disposition, his devotion to his dead mother, his distaste to all society, the coldness he had hitherto manifested to feminine attractions, made the choice of a wife difficult for him. Elizabeth's heroic and congenial character, her total inexperience in the world, and readiness to sympathize with sentiments which, to the ordinary class of women, would appear extravagant and foolish. All this suited them for each other. Lady Cecil saw them together and felt that intimacy would produce love. She was delighted, but thinking it right that the father should have a voice, she wrote to Falkner, scarcely alluding to these things, but with a delicate tact that enabled her to convey her meaning, and Falkner, jumping at once to the conclusion, saw that his child was lost to him forever. There arose from this idea a convulsion of feeling that shook him as an earthquake shakes the firm land, making the most stable edifices totter. A chill horror ran through his veins, a cold dew broke out on his forehead. It was unnatural, it was fatal, it must bring on all their heads tenfold ruin. Yet wherefore? Elizabeth was no child of his. Elizabeth Falkner could never wed Gerard Neville, but between him and Elizabeth Raby there existed no obstacle. Nay, how better could he repay the injury he had done him in depriving him of his mother, than by bestowing on him a creature, perhaps more perfect, to be his solace and delight to the end of his life. So must it be, here Falkner's punishment would begin, to exile himself forever from her, who was the child of his heart, the prop of his existence. It was dreadful to think of, but it must be done. And how was the sacrifice to be fulfilled? By restoring Elizabeth to her father's family and then withdrawing himself to a distant land. He need not add to this the confession of his crime. No, thus should he compensate to Gerard for the injury done him, and burning his papers, leaving still in mystery the unknown past, die, without its ever being known to Elizabeth, that he was the cause of her husband's sorrows. It was traveling fast to arrange this future for all three, but there are moments when the future, with all its contingencies and possibilities, becomes glaringly distinct to our foreseeing eye, and we act as if that was which we believe must be. He would become a soldier once again, and the boon of death would not be forever denied to him. To restore Elizabeth to her family was at any rate but doing her a long-withheld justice. The child of honor and faithful affection, who bore a proud name, whose loveliness of person and mind would make her a welcome treasure in any family. She, despite her generous sacrifices, should follow his broken fortunes no longer. If the notion of her marrying Neville were a mere dream, still to give back to her name and station was a benefit which it was unjust any longer to withhold, nor should it be a question between them. They were now divided, so should they remain. He would reveal her existence to her family, claim their protection, and then withdraw himself, while she, occupied by a new and engrossing sentiment, would easily get reconciled to his absence. The first step he took in furtherance of this new resolution was to make inquiries concerning the present state of Elizabeth's family, of which hitherto he knew no more than what he gathered from her mother's unfinished letter, and this was limited to their being a wealthy Catholic family, proud of their ancestry and devoted to their faith. Through his solicitor, he gained intelligence of their exact situation. He heard that there was a family of that name in Northumberland. It was Roman Catholic and exceedingly rich. The present head of the family was an old man. He had long been a widower, left with a family of 6 sons. The eldest had married early and was dead, leaving his widow with 4 daughters and 1 son, yet a child, who was the heir of the family honors and estates, and resided with his mother, for the most part, at the mansion of his grandfather. Of the remaining sons, little account could be gained. It was the family custom to concentrate all its prosperity and wealth on the head of the eldest son, and the younger, precluded by their religion at that time from advancement in their own country, entered foreign service. One only had exempted himself from the common lot and become an outcast, and in the eyes of his family, a reprobate. Edwin Raby had apostatized from the Catholic faith. He had married a portionless girl of inferior birth and entered the profession of the law. His parents looked with indignation on the dishonor entailed on their name through his falling off, but his death relieved their terrors. He died, leaving a widow and an infant daughter. As the marriage had never been acknowledged, and female offspring were held supernumerary and an encumbrance in the Raby family, they had refused to receive her and never heard of her more. She was, it was conjectured, living in obscurity among her own relations. Falkner at once detected the truth. The despised, deserted widow had died in her youth, and the daughter of Edwin Raby was the child of his adoption. On this information, Falkner regulated his conduct, and finding that Elizabeth's grandfather, old Oswy Raby, resided habitually at his seat in the north of England, his health now restored sufficiently to make the journey without inconvenience, set out for Northumberland to communicate the existence and claim his acknowledgement of his granddaughter. There are periods in our lives when we seem to run away from ourselves and our afflictions to commence a new course of existence upon fresh ground towards a happier goal. Sometimes, on the contrary, the stream of life doubles, runs back to old scenes, and we are constrained to linger amid the desolation we had hoped to leave far behind. Thus was it with Falkner. The past clung to him inextricably. What had he to do with those who had suffered through his misdeed? He had fled from them, he had traversed a quarter of the earth, he had placed a series of years between them. But there he was again, in the same spot, the same forms before him, the same names sounding in his ears, the effects of his actions impending darkly and portentously over him, seeing no escape, but by casting away the only treasure of his life, his adopted child, and becoming again a solitary, miserable wanderer. No man ever suffered more keenly than Falkner the stings of remorse. No man ever resolved more firmly to meet the consequences of his actions systematically and without outward flinching. It was perseverance to one goal that had occasioned all his sin and woe. It followed him in his repentance, and though misery set a visible mark on his brow, he did not hesitate nor delay. The journey to Northumberland was long, for he could only proceed by short stages, and all the time miserable reflection doubled every mile and stretched each hour into twice its duration. He was alone. To look back was wretchedness, to think of Elizabeth was no solace. Hereafter they were to be divided. Hereafter no voice of love or gentle caress would chase the darkness from his brow. He was to be forever alone. At length he arrived at his destination and reached the entrance to Belleforest. The mansion, a fine old Gothic building adorned by the ruins of an ancient abbey, was in itself venerable and extensive, and surrounded by a princely domain. This was the residence of Elizabeth's ancestors, of her nearest relations. Here her childhood would have been spent, under these venerable oaks, within these ancestral walls. Falkner was glad to think that, in being forced to withdraw from her his own protection, she would take a higher station, and in the world's eye become more on an equality with Gerard Neville. Everything around denoted grandeur and wealth, the very circumstance that the family adhered to the ancient faith of the land, to a form of worship which, though evil in its effects on the human mind, is to the eye imposing and magnificent, shed a greater luster round the place. On inquiry, Falkner heard that the old gentleman was at Belleforest. Indeed, he never quitted it, but that his daughter-in-law, with her family, were in the south of England. Mr. Raby was very accessible. On asking for him, Falkner was instantly ushered in. He entered a library of vast dimensions and fitted up with a sort of heavy splendor, very imposing but very somber. The high windows, painted ceiling, and massy furniture bespoke an old-fashioned but almost regal taste. Falkner for a moment thought himself alone, when a slight noise attracted his attention to a diminutive and very white old gentleman who advanced towards him. The mansion looked built for a giant race, and Falkner, expecting the majesty of size, could hardly contract his view to the slender and insignificant figure of the present possessor. Oswy Raby looked shriveled, not so much by age as the narrowness of his mind, to whose dimensions his outward figure had contracted itself. His face was pale and thin, his light blue eyes grown dim. You might have thought that he was drying up and vanishing from the earth by degrees. Contrasted with this slight shadow of a man was a mind that saw the whole world almost concentrated in himself. He, Oswy Raby, he head of the oldest family in England, was first of created beings. Without being assuming in manner, he was self-important in heart, and there was an obstinacy and an incapacity to understand that anything was of consequence except himself, or rather, except the house he represented, that gave extreme repulsion to his manners. It is always awkward to disclose an errand such as Falkner's. It was only by plunging at once into it, and warming himself by his own words, that he contrived to throw grace round his subject. A cloud gathered over the old man's features. He grew whiter, and his thin lips closed, as if they had never opened except with a refusal. "You speak of very painful circumstances," he said. "I have sometimes feared that I should be intruded upon in behalf of this person, yet, after so many years, there is less pretense than ever for encroaching upon an injured family." Edwin himself broke the tie. He was rebellious and apostate. He had talents and might have distinguished himself to his honor. He preferred irreparable disgrace. He abandoned the religion which we consider as the most precious part of our inheritance, and he added imprudence to guilt by, he being himself unprovided for, marrying a portionless, low-born girl. He never hoped for my forgiveness, he never even asked it. His death, it is hard for a father to feel thus, but his death was a relief. We were applied to by his widow, but with her we could have nothing to do. She was the partner of his rebellion, nay, we looked upon her as its primal cause. I was willing to take charge of my grandchild, if delivered entirely up to me. She did not even think proper to reply to the letter making this concession. I had, indeed, come to the determination of continuing to her a portion of the allowance I made to my son, despite his disobedience. But from that time to this, no tidings of either mother or daughter have reached us. "Death must bear the blame of that negligence," said Falkner, mastering his rising disgust. "Mrs. Raby was hurried to the grave but a few months after your son's death, the victim of her devoted affection to her husband. Their innocent daughter was left among strangers who did not know to whom to apply. She, at least, is free from all fault and has every claim on her father's family." "She is nothing and has no claim," interrupted Mr. Raby peevishly, "beyond a bare maintenance, even if she be the person you represent. I beg your pardon, sir, but you may be deceived yourself on this subject. But taking it for granted that this young person is the daughter of my son, what is she to me?" "A granddaughter is a relation," Falkner began, "a near and dear one." "Under such circumstances," interrupted Mr. Raby, "under the circumstances of a marriage to which I gave no consent, and her being brought up at a distance from us all, I should rather call her a connection than a relation. We cannot look with favor on the child of an apostate, educated in a faith which we consider pernicious. I am an old-fashioned man, accustomed only to the society of those whose feelings coincide with mine, and I must apologize, sir, if I say anything to shock you, but the truth is self-evident. A child of a discarded son may have a slender claim for support, none for favor or countenance. This young person has no right to raise her eyes to us. She must regulate her expectations by the condition of her mother, who was a sort of servant, a humble companion or governess, in the house of Mrs. Neville of Dramore." Falkner grew pale at the name, but commanding himself replied, "I believe she was a friend of that lady. I have said I was unacquainted with the parents of Miss Raby. I found her an orphan, subsisting on precarious charity. Her few years, her forlorn situation, her beauty and sweetness claimed my compassion. I adopted her." "And would now throw her off," again interrupted the ill-tempered old man. "Had you restored her to us in her childhood, had she been brought up in our religion among us, she would have shared this home with her cousins. As it is, you must yourself be aware that it will be impossible to admit, as an inmate, a stranger, a person ignorant of our peculiar systems, an alien from our religion. Mrs. Raby would never consent to it, and I would on no account annoy her who, as the mother and guardian of my heir, merits every deference. I will, however, consult with her and with the gentleman who has the conduct of my affairs. And as you wish to get rid of an embarrassment, which, pardon me if I say you entirely brought on yourself, we will do what we judge due to the honor of the family. But I cannot hold out any hopes beyond a maintenance, unless this young person, whom I should then regard as my granddaughter, felt a vocation for a religion, out of whose pale I will never acknowledge a relation. At every word Falkner grew more angry. He always repressed any manifestation of passion, and only grew pale and spoke in a lower, calmer voice. There was a pause. He glanced at the white hair and attenuated form of the old man, so to acquire a sufficient portion of forbearance, and then replied, "It is enough. Forget this visit. You shall never hear again of the existence of your outraged grandchild. Could you for a moment comprehend her worth, you might feel regret at casting from you one whose qualities render her the admiration of all who know her. Some day, when the infirmities of age increase upon you, you may remember that you might have had a being near, the most compassionate and kind that breathes. If ever you feel the want of an affectionate hand to smooth your pillow, you may remember that you have shut your heart to one who would have been a daily blessing. I do not wish to disembarrass myself of Miss Raby, Miss Falkner rather, let me call her. She has borne my name as my daughter for many years, and shall continue to retain it, together with my paternal guardianship, while I live. I have the honor to wish you a good morning." Falkner hastily departed, and as he threw himself on his horse, and at a quick pace traversed the long avenues of Belleforest, he felt that boiling of the blood, that inexpressible bursting and tumult of the heart, that accompanies fierce indignation and disdain. A vehement desire to pour out the cataract of his contempt and anger on the offender was mingled with redoubled tenderness for Elizabeth, with renewed gratitude for all he owed her, and a yearning, heart-warming desire to take her again to the shelter of his love, from whence she should never more depart. Chapter 24. Falkner's mind had undergone a total change. He had gone to Belleforest, believing it to be his duty to restore to its possessors a dearer treasure than any held by them. He left it, resolved never to part from his adopted child. Get rid of an embarrassment, he repeated to himself, get rid of Elizabeth, of tender affection, truth, and fidelity, of the heart's fondest ties, my soul's only solace. How often has my life been saved and cheered by her only? And when I would sacrifice blessings of which I hold myself unworthy, I hear the noblest and most generous being in the world degraded by the vulgar, sordid prejudices of that narrow-minded bigot. How paltry seems the pomp of wealth, or the majesty of these ancient woods, when it is recollected that they are lorded over by such a thing as that. Falkner's reflections were all painful. His heavily burdened conscience weighed him to the earth. He felt that there was justice in a part of Mr. Raby's representations, that if Elizabeth had been brought up under his care, in a religion which, because it was persecuted, was the more valuable in their eyes, participating in their prejudices, and endeared to them by habit, she would have had claims, which, as she was, unseen, unknown, and totally disjoined from them in opinions and feelings she could never possess. He was the cause of this, having, in her infancy, chosen to take her to himself, to link his desolate fate to her brighter one. And now he could only repent for her sake. Yet for her sake he did repent, when, looking forward, he thought of the growing attachment between her and the son of his victim. What could he do? Recall her? Forbid her again to see Gerard Neville? Unexplained commands are ever unjust, and had any strong feeling sprung up in either of their hearts, they could not be obeyed. Should he tell her all and throw himself on her mercy, he would thus inflict deep, irreparable pangs, and besides, place her in a painful situation, where duty would struggle with inclination, and pride and affection both made it detestable to him to create such a combat in her heart, and cause her to feel pangs and make sacrifices for him. What other part was there to take? To remain neuter, let events take their course. If it ended as he foresaw, when a marriage was mentioned, he could reveal her real birth. Married to Gerard Neville, her relations would gladly acknowledge her, and then he could withdraw forever. He should have much to endure meanwhile, to hear a name perpetually repeated that thrilled to the very marrow of his bones, perhaps to see the husband and son of her he had destroyed. He felt sick at heart at such a thought. He put it aside. It was not today, it could not be tomorrow, that he should be called upon to encounter these evils. Meanwhile, he would shut his eyes upon them. Returning homeward, he felt impelled to prolong his tour. He visited some of the lakes of Westmoreland and the mountain scenery of Derbyshire. The thought of return was painful, so he lingered on the way and wrote for his letters to be forwarded to him. He had been some weeks without receiving any from Elizabeth, and he felt extreme impatience again to be blessed with the sight of her handwriting. He felt how passionately he loved her. How to part from her was to part from every joy of life. He called himself her father. His heart acknowledged the tie in every pulsation. No father ever worshipped a child so fervently. Her voice, her smile, and dear loving eyes, where were they? They were far, but here was something, a little packet of letters, that must for the present stand in lieu of the dearer blessing of her presence. He looked at the papers with delight. He pressed them to his lips. He delayed to open them, as if he did not deserve the joy they would communicate, as if its excess would overpower him. I purpose parting from her, he thought, but still she is mine, mine when she traced those lines, mine as I read the expressions of her affection. There are hours of delight garnered for me in those little sealed talismans that nothing future or past can tarnish, and yet the name of Neville will be there. The thought brought a cold chill with it, and he opened the letters hastily to know the worst. Elizabeth had half forgotten the pain with which Falkner had at one time shrunk from a name become so dear to her. When she wrote, her heart was full of Gerard's story, and besides, she had had letters from her father speaking of him with kindness, so that she indulged herself by alluding to it, to the disappearance of his mother and Gerard's misery, the trial, the brutality of Sir Boyville, and last, to the resolution formed in childhood, brooded over through youth, now acted upon to discover his mother's destroyer. Nor is it, she wrote, any vulgar feeling of vengeance that influences him, but the purest and noblest motives. She is stigmatized as unworthy. He would vindicate her fame. When I hear the surmises, the accusations cast on her, I feel with him. To hear a beloved parent accused of guilt must indeed be the most bitter woe. To believe her innocent, and to prove her such, the only alleviation. God grant that he may succeed. And though I wish no ill to any human being, yet rather may the height of evil fall on the head of the true criminal than continue to cloud the days of a being whose soul is molded in sensibility and honor. Thus do you pray, heedless Elizabeth, may the true criminal feel the height of evil, may he, whom you have saved from death, endure tortures compared to which 1,000 deaths were nothing. Be it so, you shall have your wish. Impetuous as fire, Falkner did not pause. Something, some emotion devouring as fire, was lighted up in his heart. There must be no delay. Never had he seen the effects of his crime in so vivid a light. Avoiding the name of Neville, he had never heard that of his victim coupled with shame. She was unfortunate, but he persuaded himself that she was not thought guilty. Dear injured saint. Had then her sacred name been bandied about by the vulgar, she pronounced unworthy by the judges of her acts, ignominy heaped upon the grave he had dug for her? Was her beloved son the victim of his belief in her goodness? Had his youthful life been blighted by his cowardly concealments? Oh, rather 1,000 deaths than such a weight of sin upon his soul. He would declare all, offer his life in expiation. What more could be demanded? And again, this might be thought a more sordid motive, and yet it was not. Gerard was vowed to the discovery of the true criminal. He would discover him, earth would render up her secrets, heaven lead the sun to the very point. By slow degrees his crime would be unveiled, Elizabeth called upon to doubt and to believe. His vehement disposition was not calculated to bear the slow process of such discoveries. He would meet them, avow all, let the worst fall on him. It was happiness to know and feel the worst. Lost forever, he would deliver himself up to reprobation and the punishment of his guilt. Too long he had delayed. Now all his motives for concealment melted away like snow overspread by volcanic fire. Fierce, hurrying destiny seized him by the hair of his head, crying aloud, "Murderer, offer up thy blood, shade of Alitha, take thy victim." He wrote instantly to Elizabeth to meet him at their home at Wimbledon and proceeded thither himself. Unfortunately, the tumult of his thoughts acted on his health. After he had proceeded a few miles, He was taken ill. For 3 days he was confined to his bed in a high fever. He thought he was about to die, his secret untold. Copious bleeding, however, subdued the violence of the attack, and weak and faint, he, despite his physician's advice, proceeded homeward. Weak and faint, an altered man, life had no charms, no calls, but one duty. Hitherto he had lived in contempt of the chain of effects, which ever links pain to evil, and of the providence which will not let the innocent be forever traduced. It had fallen on him. Now his punishment had begun, not as he, in the happier vehemence of passion, had determined, not by sudden, self-inflicted, or glorious death, but the slow grinding of the iron wheels of destiny as they passed over him, crushing him in the dust. Yet his heart, despite its sufferings, warmed with something like pleasure when, after a tedious journey of 3 days, he drew near his home where he hoped to find Elizabeth. He had misgivings. He had asked her to return, but she might have written to request a delay. No, she was there. She had been there 2 days, anxiously expecting him. It is so sweet a thing to hear the voice of one we love welcoming us on our return home. It seems to assure us of a double existence, not only in our own identity, which we bear perpetually about with us, but in the heart we leave behind, which has thought of us, lived for us, and now beats with warm pleasure on beholding the expected one. On the whole earth, Falkner loved none but Elizabeth. He hated himself. The past, the present, the future as they appertained to him were all detestable. Remorse, grief, and loathsome anticipation made up the sum of feelings with which he regarded them. But here, bright and beautiful, without taint, all affection and innocence, a monument of his own good feelings, a lasting rock to which to moor his every hope, stood before him the child of his adoption. His heart felt bursting when he thought of all she was to him. Yet a doubt entered to mar his satisfaction. Was she changed? If love had insinuated itself into her heart, he was rejected. At least the plenteous, abundant fountain that gave from its own source would be changed to the still waters that neither received increase nor bestowed any overflowing. Worse than this, she loved Gerard Neville, the son of his victim, he whose life was devastated by him, who would regard him with abhorrence. He would teach Elizabeth to partake this feeling. The blood stood chilled in Falkner's heart when he thought of thus losing the only being he loved on earth. He mastered these feelings when he saw her. The first moment, indeed, when she flew to his arms and expressed with eager fondness her delight in seeing him again, was all happiness. She perceived the traces of suffering on his brow and chided herself for having remained away so long. She promised never to absent herself thus again. Every remembered look and tone of her dear face and voice, now brought palpably before him, was a medicine to Falkner. He repressed his uneasiness. He banished his fears. For a few hours he made happiness his own again. The evening was passed in calm and cheering conversation. No word was said of the friends whom Elizabeth had left. She had forgotten them during the first few hours she spent with her father, and when she did allude to her visit, Falkner said, "We will talk of these things tomorrow. Tonight let us only think of ourselves." Elizabeth felt a little mortified. The past weeks, the fortunes of her friends, and the sentiments they excited had become a part of herself, and she was pained that so much of disjunction existed between her and Falkner as to make that which was so vivid and present to her vacant of interest to him. But she checked her disappointment. Soon he would know her new friend, sympathize in his devotion towards his injured mother, enter as warmly as she did into the result of his endeavors for her exculpation. Meanwhile she yielded to his wish, and they talked of scenes and countries they had visited together, and all the feelings and opinions engendered by the past, as they were wont to do in days gone by, before a stranger influence had disturbed a world in which they lived for each other only, father and daughter, without an interest beyond. Nothing could be more pure and entire than their affection, and there was between them that mingling of hearts which words cannot describe, but which, whenever it is experienced, in whatever relation in life, is unalloyed happiness. There was a total absence of disguise, of covert censure, of mutual diffidence. Perfect confidence gave rise to the fearless utterance of every idea, and there was a repose, and yet an enjoyment in the sense of sympathy and truth, which filled and satisfied. Falkner was surprised at the balmy sense of joy that, despite everything, stole over him, and he kissed and blessed his child as she retired for the night, with more grateful affection, a fuller sense of her merits, and a more fervent desire of preserving her always near him than he had ever before been conscious of experiencing. Chapter 25. Elizabeth rose on the following morning, her bosom glowing with a sensation of acknowledged happiness. So much of young love brooded in her heart, as quickened its pulsations, as gave lightness and joy to her thoughts. She had no doubts, nor fears, nor even hopes. She was not aware that love was the real cause of the grateful sense of happiness, with which she avowed to heaven and herself that all was peace. She was glad to be reunited to Falkner, for whom she felt an attachment at once so respectful, and yet, on account of his illness and melancholy, so watchful and tender, as never allowed her to be wholly free from solicitude when absent from him. Also she expected on that morning to see Gerard Neville. When Falkner's letter came to hasten her departure from Oakley, she felt grieved at the recall, at the moment when she was expecting him to join her, so to fill up the measure of her enjoyments. With all this, she was eager to obey, and anxious to be with him again. Lady Cecil deputed Miss Jervis to accompany her. On the very morning of their departure, Neville asked for a seat in the carriage. They travelled to town together, and when they separated, Neville told her of his intention of immediately securing a passage to America, and since then had written a note to mention that he should ride over to Wimbledon on that morning. The deep interest that Elizabeth took in his enterprise made her solicitous to know whether he had procured any further information, but her paramount desire was to introduce him to Falkner, to inspire him with her sentiments of friendship, and to see two persons whom she considered superior to the rest of the world bound to each other by a mutual attachment. She wanted to impart to her father a pity for Elizabeth's wrongs and an admiration for her devoted son. She walked in the shrubbery before breakfast, enjoying nature with the enthusiasm of love. She gathered the last roses of the departing season, and mingling them with a few carnations, hung, with a new sense of rapture, over these fairest children of nature. For it is the property of love to enhance all our enjoyments, to paint the lily, and add a perfume to the rose. When she returned to the house, she was told that Falkner still slept, and begged not to be disturbed. She breakfasted, therefore, by herself, sitting by the open casement and looking on the waving trees, her flowers shedding a sweet atmosphere around, sometimes turning to her open book, where she read of the heavenly Una with her milk-white lamb, and sometimes leaning her cheek upon her hand, in one of those reveries where we rather feel than think, and every articulation of the frame thrills with a living bliss. The quick canter of a horse, the stopping at the gate, the ringing of the bell, and the entrance of Neville made her heart beat and her eyes light up with gladness. He entered with a lighter step, a more cheerful and animated mien than usual. He was aware that he loved. He was assured that Elizabeth was the being selected from the whole world who could make him happy, while he regarded her with all the admiration, the worship, due to her virtues. He had never loved before. The gloom that absorbed him, the shyness inspired by his extreme sensitiveness, had hitherto made him avoid the society of women. Their pleasures, their gaiety, their light airy converse were a blank to him. It was Elizabeth's sufferings that first led him to remark her, the clearness of her understanding, her simplicity, tenderness, and dignity of soul won him, and lastly, the unbounded, undisguised sympathy she felt for his endeavors, which all else regarded as futile and insane, riveted him to her indissolubly. Events were about to separate them, but her thoughts would accompany him across the Atlantic, stand suspended while his success was dubious, and hail his triumph with a joy equal to his own. The very thought gave fresh ardor to his desire to fulfill his task. He had no doubt of success, and though the idea of his mother's fate was still a cloud in the prospect, it only mellowed, without defacing the glowing tints shed over it by love. They met with undisguised pleasure. He sat near her and gazed with such delight as, to one less inexperienced than Elizabeth, would have at once betrayed the secret of his heart. He told her that he had found a vessel about to sail for New York, and that he had engaged a passage on board. He was restless and uneasy. He feared 1,000 chances. He felt as if he were neglecting his most sacred duty by any delay. There was something in him urging him on, telling him that the crisis was at hand, and yet that any neglect on his part might cause the moment to slip by forever. When arrived at New York, he should proceed with all speed to Washington and then, if Osborne had not arrived, he should set forward to meet him. So much might intervene to balk his hopes. Osborne might die, and his secret die with him. Every moment's delay was crime. The vessel was to drop down the river that very night, and tomorrow he was to join her at Sheerness. He had come to say farewell. This sudden departure led to 1,000 topics of interest, to his hopes, his certainty that all would soon be revealed, and he rewarded for his long suffering. Such ideas led him to speak of the virtues of his mother, which were the foundation of his hopes. He spoke of her as he remembered her. He described her watchful tenderness, her playful but well-regulated treatment of himself. Still in his dreams, he said, he sometimes felt pressed in her arms and kissed with all the passionate affection of her maternal heart. In such sweet visions, her cry of agony would mingle. It seemed the last shriek of woe and death. "Can you wonder," continued Neville, "can my father, can Sophia wonder, that recollecting all these things, I will not bear without a struggle that my mother's name should be clouded, her fate encompassed by mystery and blame, her very warm, kind feelings and enchanting sensibility turned into accusations against her. I do indeed hope and believe that I shall learn the truth whither I am going, and that the unfortunate victim of lawless violence, of whom Osborne spoke, is my lost mother. But if I am disappointed in this expectation, I shall not for that give up my pursuit. It will only whet my purpose to seek the truth elsewhere." "And that truth may be less sad than you anticipate," said Elizabeth. "Yet I cannot help fearing that the miserable tragedy which you have heard is connected with your mother's fate." "That it is a tragedy may well dash my eagerness," replied Neville. "For right or wrong, I cannot help feeling that to see her again, to console her for her sufferings, to show that she is remembered, loved, idolized by her son, would be a dearer reward to me than triumph over the barbarous condemnation of the world, if that triumph is to be purchased by having lost her forever. This is not an heroic feeling, I confess." "If it be heroism," said Elizabeth, "to find our chief good in serving others, if compassion, sympathy, and generosity be greater virtues, as I believe, than cold, self-absorbed severity, then is your feeling founded on the purest portion of our nature." While they were thus talking, seated near each other, Elizabeth's face beaming with celestial benignity, and Neville, in the warmth of his gratitude for her approval, had taken her hand and pressed it to his lips, the door opened, and Falkner slowly entered. He had not heard of the arrival of the stranger, but seeing a guest with Elizabeth, he divined in a moment who it was. The thought ran through his frame like an ice bolt. His knees trembled under him, cold dew gathered on his brow. For a moment he leaned against the doorway, unable to support himself, while Elizabeth, perceiving his entrance, blushing, she knew not why, and now frightened by the ghastly pallor of his face, started up, exclaiming, "My father, are you ill?" Falkner struggled a moment longer, and then recovered his self-possession. The disordered expression of his countenance was replaced by a cold and stern look, which, aided by the marble paleness that settled over it, looked more like the chiseling of a statue than mortal endurance. A lofty resolve to bear unflinchingly was the spirit that molded his features into an appearance of calm. From this moment he acquired the strength of body, as well as of mind, to meet the destiny before him. The energy of his soul did not again fail. Every instant, every word seemed to add to his courage, to nerve him to the utmost height of endurance, to make him ready to leap, without one tremor, into the abyss which he had so long and so fearfully avoided. The likeness of Neville to his mother had shaken him more than all. His voice, whose tones were the same with hers, was another shock. His very name jarred upon his sense, but he betrayed no token of suffering. "Mr. Neville," said Elizabeth, "is come to take leave of me. Tomorrow he sails to America." "To America, wherefore?" asked Falkner. "I wrote to you," she replied. "I explained the motives of this voyage, you know." "I know all," said Falkner, "and this voyage to America is superfluous." Neville echoed the word with surprise, while Elizabeth exclaimed, "Do you think so? You must have good reasons for this opinion. Tell them to Mr. Neville. Your counsels, I am sure, will be of use to him. I have often wished that you had been with us. I am so glad that he sees you before he goes, if he does go. You say his voyage is superfluous. Tell him wherefore, advise him. Your advice will, I am sure, be good. I would give the world that he did the exact thing that is best, that is most likely to succeed. Neville looked gratefully at her as she spoke thus eagerly, while Falkner, still standing, his eyes fixed on and scanning the person of the son of his victim, marble pale, but displaying feeling by no other outward sign, scarcely heard what she said, till her last words drew his attention. He smiled as in scorn and said, "Oh, yes, I can advise, and he shall succeed, and he will not go." "I shall be happy," said Neville with surprise. "I am willing to be advised, that is, if your advice coincides with my wishes." "It shall do so," interrupted Falkner. "Then," exclaimed Neville, impetuously, "the moments that I linger here will appear to you too many. You will desire that I should be on board already under sail, already arrived. You will wish the man whom I seek should be waiting on the sands when I reach the shore." "He is much nearer," said Falkner calmly. "He is before you, I am he." Neville started. "You, what mean you? You are not Osborne." "I am Rupert Falkner, your mother's destroyer." Neville glanced at Elizabeth. His eye met hers. Their thought was the same, that this declaration proceeded from insanity. The fire that flashed from Falkner's eyes as he spoke, the sudden crimson that dyed his cheeks, the hollow though subdued tone of his voice, gave warrant for such a suspicion. Elizabeth gazed on him with painful solicitude. "I will not stay one moment longer," continued Falkner, "to pain you by the sight of one so accursed as I. You will hear more from me this very evening. You will hear enough to arrest your voyage, and remember that I shall remain ready to answer any call, to make any reparation, any atonement you may require." He was gone, the door closed. It was as if a dread spectre had vanished, and Neville and Elizabeth looked at each other to read in the face of either whether both were conscious of having been visited by the same vision.